Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. The night presses close against the open road, carrying a silence that feels almost alive. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where truth lingers in the shadows and fear rides quietly at your side. Tonight, we bring you 5 true most haunting trucker horror stories encounters, born from deserted highways, dim rest stops, and long stretches of darkness where something unseen kept pace with the wheels. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help us keep rolling deeper into the dark. And share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. Let's see who's awake with us on the night road. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. The first story belongs to a long-haul driver named Aaron, a quiet, steady man who had been crossing the Midwest for nearly 15 years. He hauled everything from lumber to electronics, but most of his runs were simple refrigerated loads, groceries bound for warehouses on the outskirts of big cities. It happened in late autumn, on a night when the first hints of winter were edging in from the plains. The air was dry and cold, and thin threads of fog slid across the fields like low, pale ghosts. Aaron had picked up his trailer in Missouri and was headed north toward the Great Lakes, pushing through an overnight run that would take him along stretches of highway he knew almost by heart. Almost. Dispatch had put a new routing program in place that week, a system that promised shorter miles and better fuel time. The tablet on his dash glowed a soft blue, lines of digital road curling ahead in neat, confident curves. It was the kind of thing Aaron didn't much trust, but he followed it anyway. The job was the job. Traffic thinned out as the night deepened. The last of the family SUVs peeled away onto exits, toward motel lamps and fast food signs. The CB was mostly quiet, a few voices fading in and out in the static, drivers chatting about weather, scale houses, where to find a decent cup of coffee at 3 in the morning. Aaron let it drift in the background, more comfort than conversation. Sometime after midnight, the routing line on his screen shifted, a small arrow angling off the interstate onto a thinner gray road. The synthesized voice spoke up softly. "Turn right in 1 mile." Aaron frowned. He knew the interstate would carry him most of the way. He also knew that sometimes the software tried to shave time by sending trucks along back roads better suited to pick up trucks than 80,000 pounds of freight. He checked the mile marker. He had time to decide. Up ahead, the green glow of an exit sign surfaced out of the dark. A county road number, a direction, and a town name he didn't recognize. Everything looked ordinary. The CB crackled once, then fell silent. "Turn right," the tablet repeated. Aaron hesitated, then eased on his signal. The exit ramp arched down into a smaller, unlit road. 2 lanes of pale asphalt, wrapped in fields and scattered trees. The sky above looked like a black ocean, the stars faint behind a thin veil of high clouds. There were no other headlights, no taillights, just his rig, the low murmur of the engine, and the soft rattle of the trailer. The new road felt different beneath his wheels. The stripes were a little more faded, the shoulder narrower. There were no reflective posts, no glow of upcoming signs. The GPS voice was calm, certain. "Continue straight for 42 miles. 42 miles, Aaron thought. That seemed strange. No towns along the way? No junctions? But the line on the screen was simple and clear. A straight shot, cutting diagonally toward his destination. He turned down the CB, letting the truck settle into the rhythm of the road. For the first 10 miles, nothing happened. The land on either side was flat and dark. Every so often, an old barn or farmhouse appeared in the distance. Gray shapes slumped against the horizon, lights long since turned off. The fog seemed thicker here, drifting in ragged ribbons that clung to the low ground and then lifted, revealing fields of stubble and dirt. Then, up ahead, a small, pulsing light appeared on the shoulder. Aaron sat up a little straighter. A car, maybe, sitting dead on the side of the road. As he drew closer, the pattern clarified. Hazard lights, blinking a slow orange rhythm. The beams of his headlights caught the shell of an older sedan, dull paint, a bit of rust along the wheel wells, the trunk half open. He eased off the accelerator, scanning. The driver's side door was closed. The rear bumper sat inches from the edge of the narrow shoulder. The hazard lights blinked steadily as his rig rolled by, casting moving shadows across the car's empty windows. For a moment, in the glow, it looked like someone was sitting in the front seat, head bowed. Aaron's hands tightened on the wheel. He checked the mirrors. There was no traffic behind him, nothing in either lane. Common sense pricked at him. Stopping a fully loaded truck on a skinny shoulder in the middle of nowhere was dangerous. But leaving someone stranded out here in the cold felt wrong too. He slowed further, watching. As his trailer eased past, his mirror caught another splash of light. A set of blue strobes, faint but unmistakable, deeper in the fog ahead. It was gone in a blink. Then there again, low and steady. A patrol car. Aaron let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. There was a law enforcement vehicle up ahead. The situation was clearly being handled. That was what he told himself anyway. He nudged the accelerator, letting the big engine hum a little stronger, and the sedan with the blinking hazards slid away into the dark behind him. A few minutes later, the landscape around him grew even emptier. The farmhouses vanished. The faint suggestion of fences gave way to nothing at all. The fog thickened, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to swallow distant shapes into a close, gray world of his own headlights. The CB hissed once, a crackle of static that made him glance at the unit. The display glowed green, the dial set to a common channel. No voices, just a faint, scratching noise, like someone adjusting a microphone on the other end of a long, empty line. Then, softly, a word came through. Aaron. He froze. His name had slipped through the static, as clear as if someone had been sitting in the passenger seat whispering in his ear. A single syllable, stretched just enough to sound uncertain. The truck rolled on. He stared at the green numbers on the CB. No one should have been using his name. His handle, maybe, on the rare occasions he used it. But his actual name? His fingers hovered over the switch, and then he shut the volume off entirely. The cab grew very quiet. He told himself it was nothing. CB interference. A coincidence. A word that just happened to sound like his name, chopped and bent by the static. Out here, sound could play tricks. The road was long, and the mind had ways of occupying itself. He watched the distance tick down on the tablet, continue straight for 30 miles. He had only lost a few minutes. Another 10 miles slid away, and then the hazards appeared again. Same side of the road. Same dim orange pulse. Winking in the fog. Aaron felt his chest tighten. His foot eased off the accelerator, almost by instinct. His mind scrambling to catch up. The car came into view, its shape assembling out of the mist. It looked the same. Same dull paint, same missing hubcap on the front wheel, same half-open trunk lid. The hazards blinked in that same slow, steady rhythm. Only this time, there were no blue lights ahead, no hint of a patrol car. He rolled past in a slow crawl, eyes wide, taking in every detail he could without fully stopping. There was definitely someone in the driver's seat this time. A figure sat very still, shoulders tilted toward the wheel, head bowed forward just enough so that his cap hit his face. In the brief flash of headlight that crossed the window, Aaron saw the curve of a cheek, the tan collar of a work jacket, a hand hanging loosely against the steering wheel. His hand went to the brake. The figure's head began to lift. Aaron's foot tightened on the pedal. The headlights slid further along the car, and in the next beat of illumination, the interior of the sedan was empty. No figure, no driver. The seat was vacant, the belt dangling loose. The hazard lights blinked on. Blink. Off. Blink. His heart pounded in his throat. The truck drifted slightly on the lane, and he jerked it back. The trailer yawning behind him. The shoulder was far too narrow for him to pull completely off the road. A stop here would mean blocking the lane entirely, sitting exposed on a deserted road where anyone or anything could come up behind his trailer unseen. He checked his mirror again. There was nothing but the empty glow of his own marker lights, receding down a road swallowed in fog. The CB, though its volume was off, seemed suddenly louder in the silence, a silent weight on the dash. The tablet cheerfully updated his progress. Continue straight for 23 miles. Aaron swallowed. He looked ahead, where the road tunneled into a shifting veil of gray and black. His knuckles had gone white on the wheel. He forced himself to breathe, in and out, once, twice. Out here, alone. Things could easily be blown out of. Proportion. Fear could make a trick of the eyes, especially when he was tired. His logbook showed plenty of hours left, but his body disagreed. A darker shape appeared in the fog, larger than a car, sprawled across the right lane. This time, he slowed almost to a crawl. Flares burned low along the shoulder, spitting faint red light into the mist. They looked old. Their waxy bodies melted crooked, their flames dim and shivering. An entire tractor-trailer lay jackknifed ahead of him. Its cab twisted sideways across the lane, trailer angled off toward the ditch. The reflective tape along its side caught his headlights and flared white, streaks of bright light on pale metal. For a moment, Aaron's breath stopped. The colors were familiar. The company name painted along the side, half obscured by fog, could have been his own. The outline of the rig, the shape of the cab, even the pattern of small scratches near the fuel tank, it all seemed strangely, impossibly familiar. He eased the truck to the left, merging into the oncoming lane to thread past the wreck. The road was empty. Nothing had passed him for what felt like hours. As he crept by, his eyes traced the battered silhouette of the other rig. The driver's door hung open, swaying a little in the cold breeze. No one stood beside it. No emergency vehicles. No glow of additional lights. Just the hushed, fog-wrapped bulk of a truck that had lost its grip on the road and never been moved. His gaze flickered back to the logo on the trailer. It was his company's name. The same font, the same color. Only the last digit of the truck number was different. A 4 instead of a 7. A tiny change. Almost like a misprint. Aaron's heart stuttered. He checked the number stenciled on his own dash without meaning to, as if to reassure himself that he was still whole, still separate from what lay on the pavement ahead. The CB, still muted, hissed with a sudden, sharp burst of static. He could see the indicator flicker. A voice pushed through, muffled by the low volume, but still audible in the quiet cab. Don't. Stop. His fingers, moving almost of their own accord, twisted the knob up a fraction, enough for the sound to bloom into the space. Keep going, the voice whispered. It was thin, distorted, but the words were clear. Do not stop here. Aaron swallowed hard, eyes locked on the open driver's door of the wrecked truck. The fog closed around it like water. Who is this? He asked, before he could remind himself that he did not want to know. For a few seconds, only static answered. Then, very softly, like someone speaking through a hand pressed over their mouth, came the reply. You know this road. He didn't. At least, he didn't think he did. He had never driven this exact route before, not that he could remember. The county number on the turnoff sign had meant nothing to him, but something about the word no lodged in his chest, heavy and cold. He eased past the wreck, careful and slow. As the nose of his truck cleared the mangled cab, he glanced out at it again. The driver's seat sat empty. A jacket lay draped over the backrest, its sleeves hanging limp. His headlights slid further, and the image fractured into 1,000 small reflections in the side mirror. In that jumbled, shifting collage of light and glass, he thought he saw another truck, gliding along the opposite lane, a twin to his own, moving perfectly in step. He blinked. The mirror showed only the wet glimmer of pavement vanishing into fog. The CB crackled once more, then went quiet. He drove on. The miles stretched out in a strange, elastic way. The tablet insisted he was making progress, but the scenery did not seem to change. The same low banks of fog, the same dark stretches of field, the same feeling that the world beyond his headlights was very small, as if the edges of it had been pulled closer. He began counting mile markers, trying to anchor himself in something familiar. The last one he remembered clearly had read 214. The next should have been 215. The sign that emerged from the fog read 214 again. He frowned. Fatigue, he told himself. He must have misread the first one. Or maybe it had been a different number altogether. He watched for the next, his focus sharper now. When it came, his heart sank. Lambaishisu. The same number. The same slant of the digits. The same small bullet hole punched through the corner. He gripped the wheel tighter. Continue straight for 15 miles, the routing voice said sweetly. As if nothing were wrong, Aaron's mind moved quickly, flipping through every story he had ever heard at truck stops and rest areas, those low-voiced tales traded over coffee and pie. There had been one, half remembered now, about a stretch of rural blacktop somewhere in this part of the country. A kind of loop in the world, drivers said, where a person could keep driving and never reach the end. They joked about trucks running out of fuel, about entire convoys vanishing, swallowed by a piece of road that had slipped sideways from the rest of the map. He had laughed it off. People always had a story. He looked at the tablet again. Continue straight for 15 miles. The number hadn't changed. The CB whispered, barely more than a breath. You know this road. He flipped the device off entirely. The static died in an instant, leaving only the low, constant rumble of the tires. Aaron reached down and unplugged the tablet as well. The screen dimmed, then went black. The silence inside the cab felt almost physical now, pressing in. No GPS, no radio. Just the truck, the fog, and the faded white lines guiding him forward. Without the map, it was easy to imagine that the world had shrunk to this one ribbon of asphalt and nothing else. No towns beyond the cornfields, no interstates humming with cars. Just this old, almost forgotten road, and the things that drifted along it. Another glow appeared through the mist. Hazards. Blinking. Patient. Up ahead on the shoulder. He whispered a word under his breath, a habit from childhood that he hadn't thought about in years. A simple plea to no one in particular. The sedan emerged again. Same car, same missing hubcap, same half-open trunk. The hazard lights beat their steady rhythm against the night. This time he did not slow. His hands locked on the wheel and he kept his foot firm on the pedal. Not speeding, not braking, just holding that exact, deliberate pace. As his headlights touched the side of the car, the driver's door swung open a few inches, then stopped. The interior of the sedan glowed for an instant, revealing empty seats. No one slumped behind the wheel. No movement, no shadow. Just an old car on an old road. Its battery somehow still strong enough to flash those orange lights over and over and over. The CB, dead and dark, let out a faint, impossible murmur. Aaron. The sound didn't come from the speaker this time. It seemed to rise from the seat itself, from the air, from the very material of the cab. A thin, almost dry voice, like paper, sliding across paper. He stared straight ahead and did not answer. Past the car, past the place where the wrecked truck had been. This time, the road was empty. No twisted cab, no flares, no crooked door swaying in the wind. Just the white lines, the fog, and the narrow shoulders falling away into nothing. He checked the fuel gauge. It was lower than it should have been, but not alarmingly so. The digital clock on the dash, though, made his skin crawl. It had not moved in almost 30 minutes. Same hour, same minute. The seconds ticked, but the numbers did not roll forward. He tapped the dash lightly. The numbers flickered, then steadied, stubbornly unchanged. Aaron's world narrowed to breathing and driving, driving and breathing. Inhale, exhale. Watch the lines. Keep the wheels centered. Do not stop. At some point he could not have said when the fog began to thin. It fell back in loose shreds, revealing more of the sky, more of the fields. A few stars peeked through the cloud cover, sharp and cold. The pavement took on a slightly different shade, the worn gray lifting toward the clean black of newer asphalt. Up ahead, a glow emerged. Not hazards this time, not flares. The gentle arc of streetlights. Aaron's chest loosened. He recognized that specific orange glow, that careful spacing of tall poles. An interchange, the kind that curled up from a rural highway to join a larger road. He could almost hear the distant rush of other traffic, a soft, reassuring roar. A green sign rose from the dark on the right, its reflective surface shining back his headlights. Interstate, the same one he had left what felt like a lifetime ago. The same direction, the same exit number he would have reached if he had simply stayed on it from the beginning. He merged onto the ramp without hesitation, the trailer leaning slightly as the rig eased up and around. At the top, as the merge completed, he joined a stream of vehicles, cars and trucks and vans, all moving in the same direction. The presence of other headlights around him felt almost overwhelming. His hands trembled on the wheel. He risked a glance at the clock. The time had jumped forward by nearly 2 hours. He checked his logbook. The GPS unit in the dash, independent of the tablet he had unplugged, showed a blank stretch in his recorded path, 40 miles of unaccounted distance. No coordinates. No. Speed. Just a straight line from his last known point on the interstate to this one. As if the truck had simply blinked out and then reappeared. His phone, which had been resting face down on the passenger seat, lit up with a soft buzz now that there was signal again. A series of notifications trickled in. A weather alert, a message from dispatch asking for an ETA, a promotional text from a truck stop chain. He gripped the wheel and did not touch it. Up ahead, in the slow lane, an older rig rumbled along, its trailer sides dirty and streaked, its bumper decorated with sun-faded stickers. Aaron switched to the center lane and slid up alongside it. As he passed, the other driver glanced over. An older man, gray at the temples, wearing a cap with a logo so worn it was barely readable. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. The man's expression changed. Recognition, then something like shock. He reached for his CB mic, his mouth moving in words Aaron could not hear through their closed windows. His gaze did not leave Aaron's cab. Aaron flicked his CB on without thinking. The speaker came to life in a rush of sound voices stacked on voices, overlapping too many channels at once. For a moment, it was nonsensical, a jumble of words and static and weather reports. Then it cleared. That you, running northbound? That you and the white reefer trailer just came off that county road? The voice matched the man beside him. Gravelly, but urgent. Aaron hesitated, then thumbed the button. Yeah, he said. His own voice sounded strange in his ears, thin and distant. Yeah, that's me. There was a pause, a soft breath. You don't go down that road, the older driver said quietly. Nobody goes down that road. Not anymore. What is it? Aaron asked. Some kind of detour? The other man laughed once, without humor. Used to be, he said. Years back, before the big pileup, before they shut it down. Aaron's heartbeat thudded louder. What pileup? Another pause. The man's truck kept even pace with his, but his eyes were now on the road ahead, his fingers wrapped tight around the steering wheel. Fog came in thick one night, just like tonight, the voice said. Chain reaction. Cars, a bus, a couple of trucks. They say some of them never even hit their brakes. Didn't see a thing until it was too late. They closed the whole stretch after that, tore up the signs, left it to rot. Aaron swallowed. It's not on any map, the older driver continued. Not any official one. But every few years, someone gets clever with their routing software and thinks they've found a shortcut. That's when you see a rig peel off, right about where you did. Another faint breath. Most come back. Some don't. Aaron stared straight ahead at the ribbon of interstate unraveling before him, the glow of distant towns blossoming on the horizon. Did you ever go down it? He asked. A long silence followed. Long enough that he thought the man had turned off his radio. Once, came the answer. Very quiet now. Long time ago. Long enough I thought I'd imagined most of it. The man hesitated again. Did you see the car? He asked. Aaron's skin prickled. Yes, he said. Hazards on. Trunk popped. Looks like it's been sitting there since the 80s. Yes. Did you stop? Aaron's hands tightened on the wheel. No. The CB was silent for a while. Good, the man said at last. That's good. Aaron's mouth was dry. What happens if you do? He asked. The older driver did not answer immediately. His truck began to slip back a little, as if he were easing off the throttle. The gap between them widened by a small, deliberate distance. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost lost in the hum of the road. You don't want to find out, he said. You just keep rolling. And next time your screen tells you to save a few miles cutting through nowhere, you remember tonight. Some roads aren't shortcuts. They're traps. The CB clicked off on the other end. Aaron drove in silence for the rest of the night. The interstate beneath him solid and familiar. The glow of scale houses and rest area lights like small islands of safety along the way. His clock ticked normally again. His fuel burned at its usual rate. The fog thinned as dawn touched the horizon with a barely there gray. By the time he parked at the distribution center later that morning, the county road felt almost like a dream. Almost. He checked his log again. The missing segment was still there, an empty stretch of nothing on an otherwise neat line. His paper logs, carefully filled out, showed no sign of deviation. According to the numbers, He had stayed on the interstate the entire time. A few weeks later, at a truck stop half a state away, Aaron wandered into the driver's lounge while his laundry spun in a humming machine. A muted television played old local news segments. Most drivers ignored it in favor of their phones or the low murmur of their own conversations. An old report was playing. Grainy footage of emergency vehicles clustered along a foggy rural highway. Headline text along the bottom. Multi. Vehicle crash on county road claims dozens. He stepped closer, without quite knowing why. The camera panned past a line of wrecked vehicles, cars crumpled together, a bus with shattered windows, a tangle of tractor, trailers, flares burned along the shoulder. Hazards blinked on a familiar sedan, its trunk lid hanging crooked. The footage paused for a moment on a wide shot. In the background, barely more than a blur of white against the fog, a truck rolled slowly past the scene on the opposite lane. A clean rig, pristine trailer, no visible damage. Its marker lights glowed steady and calm. The image was low quality, but the shape of it made the hair rise on the back of Aaron's neck. He leaned in closer, his eyes locked on the small rectangle of screen. The truck in the background had his company's logo on the side. The same font, the same color. Paused at just the right moment. The camera had captured the trailer perfectly, and there, stenciled in small numbers on the front corner, was a truck ID he knew as well as his own name. His. He stared at the frozen frame, at a truck that should not have been there, passing through a moment that had happened years before he ever took this route. Around him, the low murmur of other drivers went on, ordinary and unconcerned. The washing machines hummed. Someone laughed softly at a joke. Coffee poured into a cup, and the smell drifted through the room. On the screen, the old newscast cut to a reporter standing in front of the same fog-shrouded stretch of road, talking about closure and reroutes and the dangers of driving in low visibility. Aaron turned away. Out on the lot, his truck waited, white and solid in the daylight, its trailer humming quietly. The tablet in the cab sat dark. The CB was off. The interstate beyond the truck stop rolled on, busy and alive, an arterial line of ordinary traffic threading its way through the day. He walked slowly toward his rig, eyes tracing the familiar logo on the trailer's side, the neat, unremarkable digits of his truck number. His hand skimmed the cool metal of the door handle. Behind him, on the muted television inside the lounge, the grainy image of his truck slipping through an old fog lingered for a final second before the broadcast moved on to something else. On some nights when the weather is just right and the fog settles in off the fields, drivers still talk about that county road. Some swear it no longer exists. Some insist it's only a story, a shared bedtime tale for adults who spend too much time alone in the dark. And some, like Aaron, say nothing at all. They just ignore the shortcuts and keep to the roads everyone else can see. Story number 2. This story belongs to a driver named Lena, who had spent most of her adult life chasing horizons under the glow of dash lights. She was one of those quiet, steady professionals who treated every mile like a promise, picked up on time, delivered on time. No drama, no heroics. Her rig was clean, her logbook tidy, and her dispatchers loved her because she never made a fuss. She preferred running at night. There was something about the empty interstate after midnight that felt honest to her. No impatient commuters cutting in front of the trailer. No crowded rest areas, just long lines of pavement and the soft rush of air around the cab. She liked the way the sky opened up when the towns fell away, how the stars seemed closer when she was cresting a dark ridge somewhere between here and there. This run was meant to be simple. Groceries frozen and dry, headed from a distribution center outside Phoenix to a chain of supermarkets scattered across western Texas. She had done similar runs 100 times. The load was sealed, the paperwork clean. Dispatch was a little anxious about winter storms pushing in from the north, but the forecasts looked manageable. Some wind, maybe a bit of ice on the higher stretches, but nothing she hadn't driven through many times before. She left the yard in the late afternoon, planning to get clear of the city before the evening rush, then settle into a long, smooth pull across the desert. If everything went right, she'd be parked in a small Texas town by mid-morning, sipping burnt coffee from a diner mug while the unloading crew did their thing. For the first few hours, everything did go right. The sky darkened slowly, turning from bright blue to a soft, bruised purple, then sinking into deep navy. Cars thinned out, the scenery flattening into open desert, punctuated by low, jagged ridges. Occasionally, an exit for a tiny town flashed past. A gas station, a cluster of low buildings, then nothing again. She kept the radio low, the CB lower, letting music and occasional chatter slip around her like water. The truck hummed, steady and strong. The road unspooled ahead, clean and straight. Sometime after 11, the wind picked up. It wasn't dramatic. It rarely was at first. Just a subtle shove against the side of the trailer, a whispery hiss across the mirrors. The sky had clouded over, hiding the stars. The world beyond her headlights had that closed-in feeling, where distance shrank and every landmark felt closer than it should. Lena checked her gauges. Fuel was fine. Oil pressure good. Temperatures where they should be. Her phone buzzed with a weather alert banner. High wind warning in effect for elevated sections. She flicked her eyes over it, then back to the road. Up ahead, the interstate climbed toward a low mountain pass, the kind that could feel higher and lonelier than it really was once the night settled over it. She debated stopping at the next truck stop, but the timing bothered her. Stop now, and she'd be hitting the delivery window a little later than she liked. Besides, the forecast had only mentioned wind, not black ice or heavy snow. She'd dealt with worse. The next exit sign glowed green out of the dark, a recognizable truck stop chain 60 miles ahead. She decided she'd push to that, take a quick break, maybe get some coffee, then see how she felt about the pass. The wind gusted again, harder. The trailer swayed just enough for her to feel it in the steering wheel. She eased back a couple of miles an hour, more habit than fear. The CB crackled to life with a voice she didn't recognize. "Y'all feeling that out there?" a man asked, his tone easy, but carrying that edge drivers got when they were watching the sky for trouble. "She's starting to dance," a few others chimed in. They grumbled about the gusts, the way the empty trailers were getting shoved around, the way the overhead signs were creaking. It was normal talk, nothing that raised the hairs on her arms. She let it wash over her and kept her eyes on the faint white lines. When the next exit sign appeared, it wasn't one she recognized. The reflective letters told of a small state route and a town she'd never heard of. San Mateo Ridge, 1 mile. Under it, a smaller sign, older and more worn. Fuel, food. Lodging. Exit now. Her GPS showed nothing there. According to the screen, the road continued unbroken for another 58 miles to the chain stop she'd been aiming for. No other services were listed, but as she passed under the overpass, she saw lights to the right, yellowish, warm, not the harsh blue-white of a big corporate plaza. A tall sign rose into the dark, its bulbs dim and patchy but still legible. Midnight Mart, diesel dine-in showers. The style of it looked decades old, like the neon they never quite replaced in some forgotten towns. The name made something in her chest tighten, and she wasn't sure why. She glanced at her fuel gauge again, even though she already knew what it would say. Plenty left, more than enough to reach the big stop. Still, the needle seemed a hair lower than it should have been for the miles she'd driven. She blamed the wind. The thought of parking someplace quieter than a busy chain appealed for a moment. Somewhere without a packed lot, where she might actually find a spot without threading between other rigs in the dark. Somewhere she could just shut down the engine and let the silence soak in for a bit. Before she had entirely talked herself through the pros and cons, her hand had already moved. The right blinker clicked on. She guided the truck gently onto the exit ramp. The ramp curved down and around, and immediately the familiar hum of the interstate faded behind her. The new road was shorter than she expected. In less than a quarter mile, it spilled her into a gravel lot, bounded on one side by a squat, rectangular building, and on the other by a row of dark, empty fields. The truck stop, if that was what it was, looked like it belonged to another era. There were only 2 diesel pumps, standing a little crooked on cracked concrete pads. Their green handles shone faintly under the overhead lights. The canopy above them buzzed with tired fluorescent tubes, a few of them flickering like they were trying to decide whether to stay lit. Beyond the pumps, the main building waited. Large front windows glowed from within, their glass slightly rippled and old. A faded sign above the door repeated the name. Midnight Mart. No brand logos, no glowing corporate slogans. Just that simple phrase, blocky and unadorned. The lot was almost empty. A single, older cab-over truck sat near the far fence, its paint job dull, its chrome long since gone matte. No other cars, no other rigs. Just her, the wind, and the distant rush of the interstate like the sea in a shell. She felt a small, unnameable hesitation then. It wasn't fear, nothing about the place screamed danger. It was more like that feeling you get when you walk into a room and forget why you came. A kind of subtle resistance at the back of the mind. But she was tired. The wind had worn on her nerves more than she wanted to admit. Even 10 minutes off the road would help. She eased her truck alongside the pumps, but didn't yet pull up close enough to fill. Her fuel gauge still didn't justify a full-on stop, and she didn't want to fuss with card readers and receipts if she could avoid it. Maybe she'd just go inside, use the restroom, grab a coffee and decide after that. She set the brakes. The sudden stillness of the cab was almost startling. Outside, the wind pushed gently at the side of the trailer. The fluorescent hum seemed louder now, a thin, insect-like whine threading through the air. She slipped on her jacket, opened the door, and climbed down. The cold hit her first. It was sharper here than on the highway, like the air had lost a few extra degrees between the exit ramp and the lot. Her breath puffed white in front of her. She zipped her jacket up to her throat and walked toward the building. The glass doors opened with a soft, hydraulic sigh. Inside, the midnight mart smelled faintly of old coffee, floor cleaner, and something sweet she couldn't quite place. The lighting was bright, but somehow gentle, as if filtered through a layer of time. The aisles were narrower than in modern truck stops, lined with shelves of snacks and canned goods whose labels looked just slightly off. She paused by a display of candy bars. The brands were mostly familiar, but the wrappers were an older style, with logos she only half remembered from childhood road trips. The expiration dates, when she checked one, were fine, fresh even, but the design belonged to another decade. The cooler doors at the back held sodas with logos that had long since been redesigned everywhere else. The prices, printed on small plastic tags, were oddly low. "Even in," a voice said from somewhere near the counter. She turned. A man stood behind the old-fashioned register, his hands resting lightly on the worn laminate. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s. His hair was more gray than brown, combed neatly back. He wore a plain button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a name tag that simply read, Lee. He smiled in a mild, almost sleepy way. "Cold one out there," he said. "Yeah," Lena replied. "Wind's getting pushy." He nodded like this, confirmed something he'd already known. "Pass gets tricky on nights like this," he said. "You running east?" "Texas," she said, then frowned a little. "How'd you know which way I was headed?" "Most folks this time of night aren't coming from that way," he said, nodding vaguely toward the dark beyond the store. "Not anymore." The answer felt like it explained nothing. She glanced around. Two booths hugged the front windows, their red vinyl seats shiny with age. An old man sat in one, a steaming mug cradled in both hands. He wore a trucker's cap with a freight company logo that hadn't existed in a long time. His eyes were on the window, watching the gravel lot like it was something more interesting than it appeared. In the other booth, a teenage girl in a faded hoodie picked at a plate of fries, doodling absently in the margins of a crossword puzzle. A portable radio sat on the table beside her, playing music so quietly it was more like a memory than a sound. Something from the 70s, soft and drifting. Lena realized, with a faint prickle at the back of her neck, that neither of them had looked up when she walked in. It was as though they'd been expecting her, and her arrival confirmed something they had already accounted for. She moved toward the coffee station. The pots were old glass styles, stained from years of use, but the coffee inside smelled fresh enough. She poured herself a cup, listening to the clink of the carafe on the warmer, the small, simple sounds anchoring her to the present. "Long night?" the man at the counter asked. "Just started feeling long," she admitted. He emmed softly, as if weighing that. "What's out there?" she asked, nodding in the vague. "Tom, direction of the highway." "Past the pass." "Just wind? Or more than that?" He didn't answer right away. He reached instead for a rag, wiping a non-existent spill on the counter. "Depends who you ask," he said finally. "Some say it's just the weather. Some say the ridge has its own mind. Likes to tap certain folks on the shoulder." "Tap them how?" "Little things," he said. "Lights going out, radios cutting off, time slipping a bit, nothing big. unless you're in the wrong place, at the wrong moment. Lena wrapped her fingers around the styrofoam cup, letting the warmth seep into her skin. The girl in the booth spoke up without looking away from her crossword. 317, she said, penciling in a word. You don't want to be on the ridge at 317. The old man across from her gave a soft, dry chuckle. Don't spook her, he murmured. Not spooking, the girl said. Just saying. Lena glanced at the clock mounted high behind the counter. It was one of those round, basic models, its face slightly yellowed with age. The red second hand swept steadily around. The time read 2:41. She checked her watch. Same. Why 3:17? She asked. The girl shrugged, still not looking at her. Just when it hits, she said. Most nights anyway. When it's going to. Hits how? Lights go dark, the old man said quietly, his voice rough with years and miles. Radio dies. Road goes real quiet. Can't see where the lane ends and the sky starts. He paused, his eyes distant. Some folks keep driving through it, some don't. Silence hummed around the words. Lena sipped her coffee. It was hotter than she expected, almost too hot, but it tasted fine. Strong and simple. Lot of stories about this stretch, Lee said, as if that settled the matter. Every region's got its own pile of them. You probably heard your share. She had. Stories traded at counters and in lounges. Tales of phantom hitchhikers. Of CB calls from voices that weren't supposed to be there. Of weird weather that seemed to follow certain trucks. She treated most of them like campfire tales for adults, something to fill the time and put a bit of chill in otherwise routine nights. Still, something about the exactness of 3:17, the way the girl had said it without a hint of dramatics, put a small knot in her stomach. She finished her coffee more quickly than usual, craving the warmth. Wanting to get back to the familiarity of her cab. How much do I owe you? She asked, stepping toward the counter and reaching for her wallet. Coffee's on the house, Lee said. She frowned. You sure? Long-haul drivers keep this place alive, he said, a small smile touching his lips. Least we can do is keep you awake. There was a sincerity in his tone that made it hard to argue. Still, something in her wanted to leave a mark of her presence behind, as if proof that she'd really been here would matter later. Then at least let me pay for a snack, she said. She grabbed a small pack of crackers from a nearby rack and set it on the counter. He rang it up on an old cash register that chimed softly with each key press. The total glowed in tiny red numbers. It was cheaper than she expected. She slid her card toward him. He looked at it like it was a photograph of something unfamiliar. Sorry, he said gently. We're cash only. That, more than anything else, made the hairs on her arms lift. Cash? Only? She repeated. Been that way as long as I can remember, he replied, setting the card back down with careful fingers. She hesitated, then dug into her wallet for a few crumpled bills. When she handed them over, she realized that most of the currency she carried was newer, redesigned layouts, different portraits, changing security features. One of the older 20s, though, matched the style he seemed comfortable with. He accepted it like it was the only real money on the counter. As he counted out her change, his gaze flicked briefly to the window, then to a corkboard mounted on the wall to Lena's left. You hauling out of Phoenix? He asked, handing her a few worn bills and coins. Yeah, she said slowly. Groceries. He nodded. Reefer unit sounded good when you pulled in, he said. No rattle. You take care of your equipment. That's smart. There was nothing unusual about the comment. It was the kind of thing any seasoned truck stop clerk might say. Still, mixed with everything else, the outdated decor, the cash-only policy, the way the two people by the window stayed oddly self-contained, it all seemed just slightly shifted. As she turned to leave, the corkboard caught her eye. It was covered in photographs. Not glossy prints, but old Polaroid squares of slightly faded color with white borders, some curling at the edges. Each one showed a truck parked somewhere in this lot or just beyond it, caught by the glare of the building's lights. Some were older cab-overs, paint jobs from companies that had long since merged or folded. Some were day cabs hooked to doubles. Some were big, shiny sleepers. In every single photo, the truck was unoccupied. No drivers leaning on fenders. No one standing in front of grills smiling with their arms crossed. Just the rigs. Alone. Most of the shots had a date scrawled in marker along the bottom border. Lena stepped closer, curiosity tugging at her. The oldest dates went back decades. The ink had paled, some numbers smudged. As her eyes moved along the rows, the years crept forward. 1,980. 1,980. 7. 1,994. 2003. 2010. A Polaroid near the middle of the board stopped her short. It showed a white tractor trailer parked beside the very pumps she had just pulled up to. The angle of the shot suggested someone had leaned out the front door of the store and snapped it quickly, the building's light flaring against the side of the trailer. The rig's position, the way the cab sat, even the small, dark patch of oil on the gravel under the bumper, they all looked familiar. Do familiar. Her gaze caught on a small detail near the rear of the cab. A faint, diagonal scratch on the driver's door. She'd picked that up only a week ago, squeezing past a concrete post that had been a little closer than her mirrors suggested. The scratch was there, in the photo. Same angle, same length. Heart thudding slow and heavy. She leaned closer and squinted at the date written along the bottom. Arlene Ziobanin Senyershitsirit. The number swam for a second. Find yours? The old man in the booth asked softly. Lena turned her head toward him. He was still looking out the window, not at her. Steam drifted lazily from his mug. How could this be mine? She asked quietly. I wasn't even driving in '98. He shrugged, a small movement of tired shoulders. Time's funny on the road, he said. You know that. The girl lifted her eyes briefly from her crossword, meeting Lena's gaze for the first time. Her eyes were dark, steady, and far older than the rest of her face. Sometimes the road sees you before you see it, she said, and then dropped her gaze again, as if that explained everything. Lena looked back at the Polaroid. The more she stared, the more certain she became. It was her truck. Not one like it. Not one from the same fleet. Hers. The thought pressed on her chest like a weight. Behind her, the clock ticked. She glanced up. Ardian Wushasanfen. Less than half an hour until that arbitrary, inexplicable time the girl had mentioned. She swallowed. How far is the pass from here? She asked Lee. He rubbed at a spot on the counter, his eyes thoughtful. About 40 minutes, he said. In good weather. Little more if the wind keeps at it. Then I'll be past it before 3:17, she said, more to herself than to him. The girl's pencil paused mid-word. Unless something slows you down, she murmured. Lena's grip tightened on her cup. The rational part of her mind marched out its arguments. This was all coincidence. A strange place, sure, with some outdated decor and eccentric regulars. But nothing supernatural. The time, the talk, the Polaroid, it all could be explained by quirks of memory, mistaken perception, and perhaps someone having fun at her expense. Another part of her, quieter but older, the part that had learned to respect bad gut feelings on lonely highways, whispered that sometimes you listened without needing to understand. You can park out back if you want, Lee said casually, nodding toward a narrow hallway that led past the restrooms. We've got a little overflow lot, quieter than the front, no reefers idling all night. His tone was light, almost offhand, but there was something in his eyes that made it less of a suggestion and more of a gentle plea. Take a nap, he added. Storm will still be there when you wake up. Ridge will too. Maybe it'll let you pass on the next hour instead of this one. Lena stood there, caught between stubbornness and something she couldn't name. She thought about her delivery times, about dispatch, already shaky about the forecast, about the sense of pride she took in being the one who didn't spook easily, who didn't build her choices on stories traded over diner counters. Then she thought about that Polaroid, about a photo taken before she ever owned this truck, before she'd signed on with her current carrier, before she'd even gotten her CDL, about the neat numbers along the bottom. Shatifan appreciated, she said at last, her voice carefully neutral. But if I lay down now, I'm not sure I'll get back up when I need to. Better if I make some distance while I'm still alert. Lee studied her for a second, then nodded slowly. Your call, he said. It's always the driver's call. The old man in the booth lifted his mug slightly, as if in a half toast. Keep your lights on, he said. And if everything goes quiet at once, just get yourself stopped. Don't try to be a hero. The girl, without looking up, added, if you see the mile marker with the bullet hole through the 7, you've got about 30 seconds. Lena managed a small, tense smile she did not feel. Thanks for the coffee, she said. She stepped back out into the cold. The wind had strengthened while she'd been inside. It pushed at her as she crossed the gravel, tugging at her jacket, whispering along the sides of the trailer. The lot's lights cast pale islands in the dark, beyond which only the vaguest shapes of fencing and field remained. She climbed into the cab and shut the door, the solid thunk of it closing oddly reassuring. For a moment, she sat with her hands on the steering wheel, the engine idling under her, the familiar vibrations rising through her seat. The interior smelled of her own coffee, of the faint scent of pine from an air freshener she'd hung weeks ago. She checked the time. 2:57. Her thumb hovered near the ignition, tempted to shut the whole thing down and take the stranger's advice. Park out back. Let 317 come and go while she slept, then roll on without ever knowing if anything would have happened. Instead, she reached for the shifter. I'm not superstitious, she told herself. I'm careful. She pulled away from the pumps, gravel crunching under the tires. In her mirrors, the building's light receded. For a moment, through the front window, she caught a glimpse of movement inside. A man wiping a counter, a girl bent over a puzzle, an old trucker looking out into the night as if watching something only he could see. Then the midnight mart slipped out of view. The access road curved back toward the highway. Ahead, the green glow of the on-ramp sign shimmered faintly. As she merged onto the interstate, the comforting rush of other vehicles returned. A pair of taillights bobbed in the lane ahead. In her mirrors, a set of headlights followed at a respectful distance. Her GPS recalculated as if she had never left. The next named truck stop still lay 50-some miles ahead. No reference to Midnight Mart appeared on any of its maps. The wind buffeted the trailer again as the road began its gradual climb toward the ridge. She adjusted her speed, giving herself extra distance to the vehicle in front. Other trucks around her were doing the same. A shared, silent understanding among drivers who had all read the same weather alerts. She flipped on the CB. Static hissed, then cleared enough for scattered voices to filter through complaints about the gusts, about dispatch schedules, about holiday traffic. Nothing out of the ordinary. No mention of 317. No talk of strange lights or haunted passes. The miles ticked by. 1000 marqué 112. She scanned each sign without really meaning to, looking for a particular flaw in the metal, a particular pierced number. The sky seemed to lower, dark pressing against the windshield. The road ahead narrowed into a tunnel of headlights. Guardrails appeared more frequently now, hugging the edges of a slope she knew dropped off steeply into blackness. Mile marker 117 flashed past, perfectly intact. No hole. She exhaled slowly, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. See? She told herself. Stories. That's all. Her dashboard clock read 3:09. The CB popped and crackled. Anybody else losing their signal up here? A voice said, a little warped by static. I just lost my GPS phone, too. Copy. Mine's glitching. Another replied. Probably the tower's freezing, or something. She glanced at her phone. No service indicator. The signal bars had evaporated. Her GPS screen froze, then flickered, the route line jittering before going blank. The radio station she'd had on, playing softly beneath the CB, cut mid-song into a wash of white noise. Her headlights did not flicker, but the world beyond their beams seemed to darken by a shade. A faint pressure built in her ears, like the feeling of rapid altitude change in an airplane. Her heart sped up. Probably nothing, she whispered. The CB crackled again. Someone cursed softly, cut off in a burst of static. Another voice bled through, irregular and distant. Nothing she could quite make out. Her clock read 3:14. Up ahead, the taillights she'd been following for the last 15 minutes seemed to pull a little farther away. Or maybe the darkness between them simply grew thicker, making the distance look greater. Her own headlights glowed on the reflective backs of road signs, on the paint of guardrails. But beyond that, the world was ink. 1000 marqué 121. She braced herself, watching every sign now, her fingertips damp on the wheel. The next marker emerged. The number 7, the girl had said. You've got about 30 seconds. She swallowed. Her breath sounded loud in her ears. The cab felt smaller, the darkness pressing closer to the glass. The next sign came into view. She let out a strained laugh that had no humor in it. Okay, she said aloud to no one. Okay. See? Just, her headlights swept over the next reflector. The top of the 7 was bent slightly, as if someone had hit it with a small object and forced the metal to buckle. In the center of that angled stroke, a neat, round hole punched clean through. Her mouth went dry. As her truck drew level with it, every light inside the cab went out. Not a flicker, not a dimming. 1 second they were on. The next, they were gone. The dash went black. The GPS died entirely. The CB silenced. Her phone screen went dark in its mount. Even the small LED that indicated the radio's power winked off. The engine still ran. She could feel its vibration. But all the instruments that showed her its health were suddenly gone. The only lights remaining were her headlights and the side markers along the trailer. The world outside them collapsed into a solid wall of dark. Her pulse slammed in her throat. Another driver's warning floated up from memory. If everything goes quiet at once, just get yourself stopped. Lena did not try to be a hero. She eased her foot off the accelerator and let the rig slow, careful not to slam the brakes on a possibly slick road. She checked her mirrors, only blackness stared back. She signaled, though she could not see if her blinker was working, and inched toward the shoulder, feeling for the rumble strip with her tires. There, the vibration buzzed up through the wheel. She followed it, guiding the truck gently onto the shoulder, then further, until she knew she was as far from the travel lane as she could safely be without dropping into the ditch she sensed, rather than saw, beyond. She brought the rig to a full stop, set the brakes, and sat there, hands frozen on the wheel. Silence settled, not the usual road silence, full of hiss and distant engines and the low moan of wind. This was thicker, denser. For a moment, it felt like she had been sealed in a bubble cut off from everything else. Then, slowly, sound returned in layers. First, the wind, pushing at the trailer, scraping past the mirrors. Then, faintly, the hiss of the distant highway, except she was on the highway. The realization crawled up her spine. Her dash remained dark. Her watch read 3:17. Far ahead, somewhere in the blackness, a dull thump echoed. Then another. A sequence of muted impacts, as if large objects were coming abruptly to rest against one another. Brake lights glowed in the distance, a chain of bright red dots appearing one by one, then frozen. She held her breath. The radio in her dash, without any visible source of power, crackled. Just once. Should have parked, a girl's voice said softly, too close, as if spoken right beside her ear. It held no malice. Only a calm observation. Lena turned her head sharply. The passenger seat was empty. Her own breath puffed white in the cab, fogging the glass. Then, as suddenly as it had gone, the world snapped back. Dash lights flared on. The radio resumed mid-song. The CB blurted overlapping voices, some panicked, some swearing. Her GPS blinked and redrew the route. Her phone buzzed as it grabbed at the returning signal. Pile up at the top of the grade, someone was shouting over the CB. Lane 1's blocked cars everywhere. Get yourself stopped, you hear me? Get off it. Out her windshield, the brake lights that had been faint and distant were now a solid line less than a quarter mile ahead. Traffic snarled into a slow, chaotic tangle. If she'd been 10 seconds further up the road when everything went dark, she'd have been in the middle of that. If she'd tried to press on through the blackout instead of pulling over, she might have been joining the thumps she'd heard. Her hands trembled. She stayed where she was, hazard flashers ticking gently in the quiet cab, until the reports calmed, and the highway patrol voices joined the CB chatter, calm and organized. They talked about detours, clearing times, injuries in careful clinical terms. From what she could decipher, the crash had been ugly but not as bad as it might have been. Cars, a couple of pickups, one truck whose driver had apparently done everything right and still gotten caught. She whispered a soft word of thanks to a ceiling that did not answer. Eventually, officers began guiding traffic slowly past the wreckage in the remaining open lane. When it was her turn, Lena eased back onto the pavement and rolled forward with the line. She kept her eyes on the patrol flashers, on the reflective vests, on the cones. She did not let herself look too closely at the twisted shapes on the shoulder. The important thing was that people were up and moving, walking along the edge, talking into radios. Life still moved among the still metal. As she crept past, she noticed one odd thing. The mile marker with the bullet hole in the 7 sat just beyond the worst of the chaos. Someone had tied a piece of bright caution tape around its post. It fluttered in the wind like a small flag. By the time she cleared the ridge, dawn had begun to bleed into the sky behind her. The wind eased. The road ahead straightened, flattening out into long, quiet miles. Her clock read 4:02. She drove in a kind of focused numbness for another 40 minutes, then pulled into the big chain truck stop she'd originally planned on. The lot was crowded, but not impossible. She found a spot between two reefers, set her brakes, and just sat, watching the sky lighten. When she finally climbed down, her legs felt rubbery. Inside, the truck stop buzzed with morning energy drivers finishing their nights, others just beginning their days. Televisions over the counter replayed news footage of the pileup on the ridge. Twisted vehicles, emergency lights flashing, talking heads discussing weather conditions. Bad spot, a driver at the counter said to no one in particular, nodding at the screen. Always has been. I don't like crossing there between 3 and 4 if I can help it. Lena's eyes snapped to him. Why that time? She asked. He shrugged. Old thing my dad used to say, he replied. Claims that's when he saw the worst of it. Said, if you can, kid, wait it out. Get a coffee. Road'll still be there. I figured he was just picking a number, but I'll tell you what. I've had some weird runs across that ridge in those hours. Ever hear of a place called Midnight Mart? She asked, the name feeling strange in the bright, corporate-lit diner. He frowned. Can't say I have, he said. Chain I haven't been to? No, she said slowly. Independent. 2 diesel pumps. Old sign. Out by San Mateo Ridge? He shook his head. San Mateo exit doesn't have anything on it, he said. Just an overpass and a cattle guard. Been that way since they shut the old service station down after a fire. You thinking of somewhere else? She was sure of the name she'd seen on the sign, on the building, on the coffee pot. Must be, she said. But later, when she checked her receipts, there was one she didn't remember adding. A small, thermal slip, tucked behind a fuel ticket. Its printing was faded. The text slightly blurred, but still legible. Midnight Mart. 1 coffee. 1 snack. Cash sale. Thank you. The date line read simply, 3/17. No year. She stared at it for a long time. Months later, on a layover in a different state, Lena wandered into a tiny diner near a small truck repair shop. The walls were covered in old photographs and clippings, a collage of local history and road lore. One yellowed newspaper article, pinned near the back, caught her eye. Unsolved. The Midnight Mart, read the headline. Beneath it, a black and white photo showed a familiar squat building. The caption explained that the station had burned down in the late 90s after an electrical fault. The article mentioned, almost as a side note, that drivers on the ridge still claimed, once in a while, to find its lights burning on stormy nights, offering coffee and a place to wait out bad hours. Her gaze drifted to a smaller photo inset beside the main one. A younger man in a trucker cap, standing in front of a rig, smiling with his arms folded. The article quoted him as one of the last drivers to see the place open in its original form. Her breath caught. The man looked uncannily like the older trucker who had sat in the booth by the front window the night she'd stopped there. Same angle to the jaw, same set to the shoulders. The caption named him. The last name made her blink. It was the same surname that had been stitched on the patch of an old jacket her father kept hung by the door at home. A jacket from his driving days, long before she ever thought about taking to the road. When she called him that evening and, in a careful, almost casual way, asked if he'd ever heard of a place called Midnight Mart near San Mateo Ridge, the silence on the line told her everything she needed to know. Thought they closed that down before your time, he said at last, his voice softer than usual. You see it? Yeah, she said. I think so. Another pause. Did it help? He asked. She thought of the Polaroid with her truck on the board. Of the way the lights had gone out right on 317. Of the soft voice in the cab, telling her what she already suspected. Yeah, she said quietly. It did, her father exhaled. Then you listen to it, he said. If it ever shows up again, some places on the road don't belong to any map. They belong to something else. They don't always open their doors. But when they do, It's for a reason. She drove that ridge again months later, on a clear summer afternoon. The sky was bright, the air still. The mile markers flicked past in the sunlight. The post with the bullet-holed 7 stood there, unremarkable, its metal warmed by the day. The San Mateo exit came and went. There was no sign, no fuel symbol. Just dry grass and old fence posts. She didn't see Midnight Mart again. But sometimes, on lonely weather-beaten nights in other states, when the wind picks up and the clock creeps toward that curious hour, she watches the distant glimmer of off-ramps a little more closely. Not every strange light off the interstate is a trap. Some, for reasons no one fully understands, are a quiet hand on the shoulder, nudging a tired driver out of the path of something bad. The road takes, and the road gives. And somewhere out there, beyond the maps and routing software, a small, outdated truck stop waits in the dark, its coffee always fresh, its doors opening only for those who, for one night at least, need to be anywhere but exactly where the road thinks they should be. Story number 3. This one follows a driver named Miguel, a night runner with a steady reputation and one bad shadow trailing behind him. Years before, when he was still new to long haul, Miguel had run team with a man named Daryl. They'd split miles, shared stories, watched each other's backs. One winter night, on a mountain pass in Wyoming, Daryl had been driving while Miguel slept in the bunk. A patch of invisible ice, a gust of crosswind, a moment's bad luck, no one ever agreed which detail mattered most. Miguel woke in a hospital with a concussion and a scar on his forehead. Daryl didn't wake up at all. Ever since then, Miguel refused to team. He drove solo, lined his sleeper with heavy curtains so the bunk was just for rest, not company. He kept the cab neat, the passenger seat mostly empty except for a duffel and a jacket, and he developed one rule that he treated like law. If he felt drowsy, he pulled over. No delivery window, no bonus, no pressure from dispatch would override that. It worked. His record stayed clean. His safety scores were perfect. People at the company pointed him out as the calm one. This particular load was a West Coast run, from Sacramento up to Seattle. Fresh produce, time-sensitive but not critical, moving through the spine of the Pacific Northwest along I-5. It was early spring, the kind of in-between season when the passes weren't buried, but the weather still remembered winter. He left Sacramento in late afternoon, planning his timing so the climb over the Siskiyous would hit in the quiet hours when most cars were home and parked. The forecast talked about rain, low clouds, and maybe patches of fog on the higher elevations. Nothing severe. He'd driven worse in the Rockies. The first leg went smooth. Farmland and low hills rolled past. The sky dimmed from blue to purple to deep black. By the time he passed Redding, a light drizzle had begun, smearing the reflections of town lights on the windshield. Miguel felt good, rested. He'd slept well during the day, eaten decently, done his checks. He hummed along, radio low, the wipers knocking a steady rhythm. Past Shasta Lake, the road grew more serious. Dark pine forest pressed close. The mountains rose black against a sky with no stars. Rain thickened, the drops fat and cold, tracing bright paths in the headlights before vanishing into the asphalt. He adjusted his speed down. Not a big drop, just a few miles an hour. Enough to feel respectful. The CB was mostly quiet. Once in a while, a voice came through, talking about road spray or asking whether the chain law lights were on up north. Another driver complained mildly about rookies flying through this wet like it's August. Miguel listened with half an ear and kept his attention out front. Around midnight, somewhere south of the Oregon line, he felt the first small yawn tug at his jaw. He checked the clock, then his own body. The drowsiness wasn't deep yet, more like a suggestion. He flexed his fingers on the wheel, rolled his shoulders. The warm air blowing from the vents made the cab too comfortable. He turned the temperature down a notch, letting a bit of cool seep in, and cracked the window an inch. Damp air rushed through, smelling of pine and wet earth. That helped. The miles kept coming. The rain shifted in intensity, sometimes easing to a mist, sometimes returning in a sudden, heavy hiss. Dark shapes of other rigs appeared and slid past, their marker lights floating in the mist. Now and then, a car would ghost by, its taillights fading quickly into the dark. His mind wandered, as minds do on long nights. He thought briefly of Daryl, as he always did when the weather turned tricky. Not in a sharp, painful way anymore. More as a habit, an inward nod to someone who had gone ahead on the same road. Around 1:30 in the morning, just north of Eureka, he noticed something odd. In the narrow rear-view mirror mounted high in the cab, angled to give him a partial view of the sleeper area, the curtain over his bunk wasn't hanging quite right. He could see the edge of it in the mirror's corner, a familiar dark rectangle. Normally, it lay flat. Now its bottom edge seemed pushed in a little, as if something were resting lightly against the other side. He frowned, then snorted softly to himself. Road vibration. The curtain's clips had probably shifted. He made a mental note to fix it when he stopped at the next pullout. Still, he found his eyes drifting to the mirror more often after that. The deflection in the curtain remained. It didn't sway with the motion of the truck the way the fabric above it did. It bowed inward, steady, like a hand was pressing there gently from the bunk side. Miguel cleared his throat and reached for the radio, turning the volume up a little. A late-night host's calm voice talked about traffic in some distant city. The familiar chatter filled the cab, pushing back at the quiet. The road climbed. Rain thickened. The shoulders narrowed. Dark forest leaned in on both sides. Trees crowded close to the edge of the pavement. Their trunks black silhouettes. Another yawn. This one deeper. He rolled his window down further. Cold air slapped his face. The sudden chill made his eyes sting, but it helped. "Next rest area I'm stopping," he said aloud, just to have a voice in the cab. The GPS showed a rest area in 12 miles, not far. He could make that easily. A green sign confirmed it a minute later. Rest area 12 miles. Good. Something shifted behind him. It was a small sound, so quiet he almost would have missed it if the wipers hadn't happened to pause between cycles at that exact moment. A soft creak from the direction of the bunk, like weight moving on the mattress. Miguel's hands tightened on the wheel. He glanced at the mirror. The curtain bulged a little more. No movement he could really see, but the shape of the push was different now, higher up, as if someone had changed position. "Road noise," he muttered. "Cab flex." He'd heard that explanation from mechanics and older drivers for all kinds of creaks and rattles. The frame of a tractor twisted slightly on rough pavement, making bed springs and cabinets complain. It was normal. Still, the tiny hairs on his arms lifted. "CB check," a voice said suddenly, breaking into his thoughts. "Radio check on 38? Miguel reached for his mic partly out of habit, partly out of relief at the distraction. "Loud and clear," he replied. "Appreciate it," the voice said. "You seeing all this rain up there too, driver?" Miguel gave general weather observations, exchanging a few easy comments. The other driver sounded relaxed, with the kind of drawl that could make anything sound unhurried. As they talked, Miguel's eyes strayed again to the overhead mirror. For a second, a single, impossible heartbeat, he thought he saw the distinct outline of a shoulder in the dim reflection behind the curtain, the suggestion of a human shape reclining on the bunk. He blinked hard. When his eyes focused again, there was only the bowed curtain, motionless. His throat went dry. The CB crackled. "You still with me, partner?" the other driver asked. "You got quiet." "Yeah," Miguel said. "Just watching the road. Little tricky up here." "Copy that." They rode the airwaves together for a few more miles. Talk of nothing and everything. Fuel prices, dispatch quirks, favorite small diners. The kind of conversation that kept the brain occupied just enough to stay sharp. Miguel didn't mention the curtain. The rest area sign appeared in the rain-smeared distance. Rest area, 2 miles. He felt the familiar pull to stop, stronger now. His eyelids felt heavier. His focus took just a fraction of a second longer to snap back each time they drifted. "I'm gonna grab a quick nap at the next stop," he told the CB voice. "Catch you on the flip side." "That's smart," the man said. "Better parked than sorry." "Watch yourself on that bunk, though." Miguel hesitated. "What do you mean?" he asked. Static fuzzed, then cleared. "Nothing," the voice said quickly. "Just old-timers' superstition. You hear creaks back there when you're alone. You get your rest anyway. Don't let 'em talk you out of it." Miguel frowned. "You too?" he asked before he could stop himself. Another small burst of static. 10-4, the man replied. "You're not the first. You're not the last. See you down the line, driver." The channel went quiet. Miguel checked the label on his CB. The dial sat firmly on 19. He hadn't changed it. The rest area loomed ahead, a pool of light in the dark, concrete pads glistening with rain. A couple of trucks were already parked, huddled near the building. The glow of vending machines showed through the restroom windows. He had a split second to decide. Pull in, park. Step into the quiet, walk around, stretch, then crawl into that bunk with the curtain that bowed like something was behind it. Or roll past. Push to the next stop. Break his rule. He took the exit. The ramp sloped gently down. The truck rumbled over wet pavement, then slowed as he followed the arrows toward the truck parking area. He chose a spot near the far edge, away from the few other rigs. He liked it that way, fewer doors slamming, less engine noise. He set his brakes. The hiss of released air filled the cab. For a moment, he just sat there, listening to the engine idle. The rain drummed on the roof. Headlights from a passing car swept faintly across his curtains, then slid away. He told himself he was being ridiculous. Ghosts in the bunk, figures in the mirror. He was tired, his brain firing off little misfires. That was precisely why he needed to sleep. He shut off the engine. Instantly, the world shrank. The sound of the rain grew more intimate. The ticking of cooling metal became audible. The cab's interior seemed to fold inward, the familiar space taking on a different personality without the engine's heartbeat. He turned in his seat and looked back. The bunk curtain hung in its usual place, dark fabric shielding the little sleeping nook from the cab. The bulge in it was unmistakable now, a gentle curve about halfway up, as if someone's knees or feet were pushing against it from the inside. He swallowed. "Cab flex," he whispered. Nothing more. He flicked on the small dome light above the sleeper area with a quick tap of a switch. Yellowish light flooded the space behind the curtain, turning the fabric slightly translucent. He could see the frame of the bunk behind it, the faint outline of a pillow, and the bulge. It did not change with the light. "Okay," he said quietly. "If there's a raccoon back there, we're gonna have a problem." Humor, even thin humor, helped. He stood carefully, knees brushing the steering wheel, and reached for the curtain. His fingers hesitated an inch away from the fabric. The truck rocked slightly on its suspension, as if someone had just shifted their weight inside. He grabbed the curtain and yanked it aside. The bunk lay empty. Neatly made a habit he'd developed on the road, blanket smoothed, pillow centered. No duffel bags, no stray items. No sign of any intruder, animal or otherwise. Miguel's breath left him in a short, relief-heavy laugh. "See?" he told himself. "Mind games." He sat on the edge of the bunk. The mattress creaked faintly. The sound he'd heard earlier now making simple mechanical sense. He toed off his boots, set them inside the step, shrugged off his jacket, folded it, and placed it by the wall. Then he lay down slowly, stretching out, feeling each muscle complain, and then relax. He left the bunk light on. The cab seemed smaller from this angle, the roof closer. Raindrop shadows trembled on the ceiling. The faint sound of someone closing a truck door elsewhere in the lot filtered in, distant and harmless. Drowsiness rolled over him in a gentle, inevitable wave. He let his eyes close. He did not remember falling asleep. He remembered waking up. He came to with his heart racing and the overwhelming sensation that someone was inches away from his face, watching. His eyes flew open. The curtain he'd shoved aside now hung closed again, drawn fully across the bunk opening. The air felt different, cooler, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. His breath puffed faintly, visible for just a second before it dissolved. He could not remember pulling the curtain back. He lay very still. From the cab, a faint sound reached him, the soft click of a switch, then the whir of the ignition, as if someone had turned the key to the accessory position. Miguel shot upright, his elbow bumping the wall. The cab lights outside the curtain glowed dimly. The dashboard, barely visible through the small gap at the bottom of the curtain, showed its gauges lit. The radio's LED shone blue. He had turned all of those off before climbing into the bunk. Cold air slid along the floor from the footwell, brushing his bare ankles. He swung his legs over the side and shoved the curtain aside with more force than needed. No one sat in the driver's seat. The key remained in the ignition where he'd left it, turned to the on position. He didn't remember turning it. But the gauges were live, needles halfway to life. The engine itself was off. His fingers shook as he reached forward and snapped the key back to off. "Enough," he whispered. "Enough." His watch glowed faintly when he pressed the side. 2:09 in the morning. He had slept less than 40 minutes. He should still be exhausted. Instead, his body hum vibrated with adrenaline. Rain streaked down the windshield. Headlights swept occasionally across the lot as other vehicles came and went. Somewhere, a reefer unit cycled on with a low rumble, then settled. Miguel sat in the driver's seat, heart pounding, staring at the glass. "I'm leaving," he said to the empty cab. "I'm awake, that's what matters." He did his quick checks out of rote habit. Mirrors, gauges, the lot around him. Everything looked ordinary. No shadows that didn't belong. No figures between trucks. Just wet pavement and the glow of sodium lights. He started the engine. It caught easily, coughing once, then settling into a steady purr. The vibration felt reassuring. As he pulled out of the rest area, he caught a last glimpse of the building in his side mirror. For a fraction of a second, in the reflected glow, he thought he saw a figure standing just inside the glass door, watching the lot. Broad-shouldered, hands on hips, head tilted. It looked like Daryl. Miguel blinked hard. The reflection shifted back to nothing but fluorescent light and a vending machine. He merged back onto the freeway. Rain still fell. The road curved and climbed. His body, kicked wide awake by the strange interruption, felt sharp. His eyes scanned constantly, picking up every reflector's flash, every soft rise in the pavement. His CB crackled. "Anyone else just get woken up for no good reason?" A voice asked with a weary laugh. "Thought I had another hour in me." Another driver answered, then another. Half-joking complaints about weird dreams, about cabins going cold, about alarms they didn't remember setting. It was the kind of coincidence that made no sense, and perfect sense at the same time. Miguel drove on. At about 2:30, near the top of one long grade, he saw them. Brake lights. A chain of them, flaring red through the rain ahead. He eased off the accelerator. The lights looked too close together. Too sudden. For ordinary traffic. "Cess curves slick," a voice shouted over the CB. "Four-wheeler spun out in the left lane, keep your eyes open." Miguel's hands moved on their own, feathering the brakes, easing his speed down gradually. A truck ahead of him hit the brakes harder than it should have, its trailer fishtailing a little before the driver corrected. As Miguel crept closer, he saw the source of the trouble. A compact car turned sideways, nose into the guardrail, hazard lights blinking wildly. Its presence forced all traffic to squeeze awkwardly past in the right lane. Had he been here 10 minutes earlier, at his original pace, he might have been rounding that curve at full speed while the car was still in motion. A small shiver ran through him. As he passed the wreck, his eyes flicked to the overhead mirror by habit. In the dim reflection, just for that heartbeat of distraction, he saw the bunk behind him, and someone sitting on it, not clearly. The image wavered, washed out by the angle and the poor light. But there was no mistaking the shape. Shoulders against the wall, one knee up, a familiar ball cap pulled low. The figure lifted two fingers in a small, casual salute. Miguel's gaze snapped back to the road. "You are overtired," he told himself firmly. "You are seeing what you expect to see." When he dared a glance back at the mirror, the bunk was empty again. Curtain half open, pillow undisturbed. The miles slid under his tires. By the time the sky lightened near Portland, he had not seen the bunk curtain move again. The strange cold spots had faded. The eeriness of the rest area had settled into the part of his mind where he kept things he did not fully believe but would never quite forget. Later that week, parked at a terminal yard, he decided more out of curiosity than fear to pull the footage from his inward-facing dashcam. He didn't watch it often. It was mainly there for safety policy and insurance. He fast-forwarded through most of the drive, the gray-green blur of freeway and the repetitive dance of his hands on the wheel. Nothing unusual. Then he reached the timestamp between 1:45 and 2:20 in the morning at the rest area. He slowed the playback. The camera, pointed slightly down from the upper corner of the windshield, caught the cab from above. The driver's seat, the passenger seat, and a slice of the bunk opening. He watched himself come to a stop, then climb back into the bunk, pulling the curtain aside. He noted the way he paused, the way his shoulders looked tight. He watched the curtain close. That was odd. He did not remember closing it that carefully, but the video showed his own hand drawing it all the way across and tucking the edge behind a clip, like someone used to making a space private. He watched his own shape settle in the bunk, only a vague outline through the curtain. Time sped up. The minutes ticked. At 2:04, the curtain lifted at one corner. Just a little. Just enough for a hand to slip out. He froze the frame. The fingers looked like his own same shape, same small scar on the knuckle, but they were angled differently. The hand reaching not from the bunk side, but from just beyond, as if emerging from a darker space than the narrow mattress allowed. The hand reached toward the front of the cab. In the next second of footage, the ignition key turned, though no one sat in the driver's seat. He played it again, slower. The hand reached out, brushed the back of the driver's seat, then seemed to flatten against the air itself, like it had found a pane of invisible glass. The fingers spread, splayed in a gesture that looked very much like someone steadying themselves. Then the curtain fell back. A chill moved along Miguel's spine, mild and strange, but not wholly unwelcome. He watched himself wake up a moment later, lurching from the bunk, pulling the curtain aside with confusion on his face. The footage ended with him leaving the rest area, the cab empty except for one driver who now knew, beyond all reason, that something else had shared the space with him for that brief slice of night. He copied the clip to a secure folder, more to keep it than to show it to anyone. He didn't have words that would make sense of it. If he told the story at a counter, it would be treated as a tale to pass the time, filed next to phantom hitchhikers and haunted mile markers. But in the quiet, when rain hits the windshield and the dashboard glow casts soft light over the bunk, he sometimes feels the cushion dip just a fraction behind him, as if weight has settled there. Not heavy, not threatening, just present. A watchful co-driver, perhaps, who still has miles to cover. Miguel keeps his rule. If he's tired, he stops. If he hears a creak in the bunk when he's thinking of pushing on anyway, he takes it as a reminder he doesn't dare ignore. On the road, help doesn't always come in the form people expect. Sometimes it's a patrol car, sometimes a random stranger at a truck stop, sometimes a call on the CB, and sometimes, in the small hours between one lonely mile and the next, it's the quiet sense that someone sits just out of sight in the sleeper, making sure a driver who once slept through the worst night of his life never again closes his eyes when the road still needs him awake. Story number 4. This one follows a driver named Denise, a woman who had been living by the rhythm of the highway for more than 2 decades. She was one of those drivers dispatch loved to lean on, dependable, fast, and almost eerily calm. Give her a tight schedule, and she'd find a way to make it work. It wasn't that she broke rules openly. Her logs were neat, her inspections up to date, her equipment well kept. But like a lot of seasoned drivers, she'd learned where she could shave a few minutes, nudge a 15-minute break into 12, stretch a legal day by just this once. She told herself it didn't really matter. She knew her limits. She'd been awake longer and driven farther, and nothing bad had ever happened. Until one night reminded her that nothing bad ever happening can change in a single mile. She was running freight up the spine of the Appalachians, hauling a dry van loaded with household goods from Georgia up to Pennsylvania. The route took her along a 2C Plains, well-traveled interstate that twisted and climbed through dark mountain cuts and low, foggy-prone valleys. It was a road she knew well enough to picture every rest area and truck stop along the way. The load had come out of the shipper late. By the time she hit the interstate, she was already playing catch-up with the delivery window. Dispatch had been apologetic but firm. If she didn't get it there by morning, the customer would refuse the load and the company would be on the hook. Denise had nodded, though the planner on the phone couldn't see it. "I'll get it there," she'd said. She started fresh that afternoon, rested and caffeinated, determined to keep everything clean. For the first 5 hours, it went exactly according to plan. The sky went from faint gold to deep blue to black, stars swallowed by low, thick clouds rolling in from the west. Light rain began to freckle the windshield, mist clinging to the shoulders and the trees. Traffic thinned as the evening wore on. Most cars turned off toward towns and exits, leaving long stretches of highway settled into that peculiar quiet that only comes after midnight. The kind that makes the world feel smaller, as if the road and the truck and the driver are the only things left awake. By 10, Denise had taken one short break shorter than it should have been, by about 10 minutes, and she knew it. She hadn't even gotten out of the cab, just logged off duty. Closed her eyes in the driver's seat for a moment, then hit the button again, and rolled. Not a big deal, she told herself. She still felt sharp. Her body was used to these hours. Her internal clock had long ago shifted to the night. Around midnight, a chill slid into the cab that had nothing to do with the weather. The interstate climbed toward a low summit, guardrails hugging the curves, pine trees leaning close beyond them. Fog pooled in the low spots, thinning and thickening in strange, moving shapes. The rain, which had been steady but light, gave way to a fine spray that hung in the beams of her headlights like dust. Up ahead, a tall sign appeared out of the murk. Way Station, 2 miles. All trucks when flashing. Denise barely glanced at it. Everyone knew that station. It sat at the top of a long grade, just before the road dropped toward a river and a series of wider valleys. In all the years she'd run this route, she had never once seen it open at night. It was one of those sometimes stations that state DOT used mostly during the day when enforcement was heavy and traffic steady. Sure enough, as she drew closer, the small set of amber warning lights mounted beside the sign were dark. She rolled on, already halfway forgetting it. Then, less than a minute later, another sign appeared. Way Station 1 mile. Prepare to stop when flashing. This time, the lights were on. They blinked steadily in the fog, casting a faint orange pulse over the wet pavement. Denise's grip tightened on the wheel. She flicked her eyes to the right shoulder, where reflective posts marked the edge of the drop. No turnouts in sight. No safe place to pull over and double-check anything. If a scale house was open and she blew past it, cameras would catch that. Fines weren't cheap, and her company would not thank her for an avoidable citation. Maybe they were running a night operation tonight, she thought. Maybe she'd just never hit this stretch at the right time to see it before. A voice on the CB cut through the hiss of static. Anyone catching them lights at the top? A man asked, sounding puzzled. Thought that scale was shut after dark. Denise thumbed her mic automatically. Yeah, she said, seeing the flashers. Guess they're open tonight. Static crackled. Funny, the man muttered. I rolled through here an hour ago. Dark as a tomb. The interstate crested another rise. The fog thinned just enough to give her a better view ahead. In the distance, she saw it. The intake lane peeling off to the right. The low shape of the way station squatting beyond. Its windows bright. The open sign above the lane glowed a solid, unmistakable green. No other trucks were in sight. Her heart did a small, unhappy flip. It was always worse being the only rig through a scale. No one in front to set the rhythm. No one behind to share the scrutiny. Still, rules were rules. She slowed, eased into the right lane, and followed the signs. The station looked odd. Not wrong exactly, just older. The building was a one-story rectangle of cinder block painted a once white with it had yellowed with time. A metal awning jutted out over the scale pad. The light under it was harsh and fluorescent, giving everything a flat, chalky look. The big digital sign that should have displayed weight and lane instructions was there, but it was dark. Instead, a round analog dial set in a metal box above the lane face flickered, a needle trembling against its glass face as her truck rolled over the scale. She shifted into low gear and crept forward until the stoplight in front of her turned red. So far, everything could still be normal, she told herself. Maybe the state hadn't upgraded this site yet. A few old-style stations were still out there. Inside the building, someone moved behind the glass. A man stepped into view, tall and thin, his hair gray at the temples. He wore a uniform. Dark pants, pale shirt, tie. An embroidered patch on his shoulder bore the state's shield, but the design looked off, older. The colors were faded, the lettering not quite matching the patches she'd seen on more modern officers. He raised a hand and motioned her to pull up alongside the inspection bay. A small, archaic speaker crackled next to her window. Pull forward to the line, driver, his voice said through it. Bring your paperwork inside. Denise swallowed, shifted, and rolled ahead, stopping where a painted stripe on the concrete marked the inspection area. She set her brakes, listened to the air hiss out, and tried to steady her breathing. It's just a scale, she told herself. You're legal. Everything's in order. She grabbed her folder from the passenger seat logs, bills of lading, registration, and stepped out into the damp air. The night wrapped around her with a colder edge here. The station lights cast sharp shadows on the concrete, making the corners outside the beam seem deeper than they should have been. The smell of wet pavement and engine exhaust mingled with something faintly metallic. She crossed to the door and stepped inside. The interior of the way station was even more outdated than the outside suggested. A metal counter ran along the front window, its surface worn thin where countless folders had been slid back and forth. Old corkboards on the walls held curling safety posters and rate charts from years past. An analog clock ticked on the far wall, its hands creeping toward 12:17. Behind the counter, the man she'd seen through the glass stood waiting. His face was lined but not unfriendly. His eyes, though, were sharp in a way that made her feel briefly as if he were weighing her as much as her truck. "Evening," he said. His voice sounded clearer here than through the speaker. A low, level tone without much accent. "Papers. Please." She handed him the folder. He opened it with care, flipping through the documents with long, practiced fingers. He paused on her log pages, studying them in silence. "How's the road?" he asked without looking up. "Wet, bit of fog," she said. "Nothing too bad yet." He nodded slightly, still focused on her logs. "You've been keeping a good pace," he said. "Made up some time since your start." Denise shifted her weight. "Within my hours," she said. "I'm legal." "On paper," he agreed. There was no accusation in his tone, just an observation. His finger traced a line down her recap. "You logged your break back at mile marker 130A2, he said. 15 minutes on the dot." "That's what it was," she said. He looked up then, and their eyes met. "You stopped your wheels for 8 minutes, he said quietly. "You left the engine idling the whole time. You spent the last 3 minutes answering messages from dispatch. You didn't step out of the cab. You didn't stretch. You didn't let your brain really shut down." He tapped the page lightly. "But you gave yourself 15 on paper." Cold slid through her chest. There was no way he could know those details. They weren't on any log line, digital or otherwise. Only she knew exactly how those minutes had gone. "How do you—" she began. He continued without answering. "You also pushed your start this morning," he added mildly. "Woke earlier than you wrote down. You've been awake, in truth, longer than these lines admit." She closed her mouth. The station's clock ticked loudly in the quiet. "I'm still within the legal 13 on duty," she said after a moment. "Driving time's clean. My company's ELD would have flagged me if I wasn't." He closed the folder with a soft snap. "Your company's device knows what the law can see," he said. "I'm more interested in the hours your bones can feel." He turned to an old green metal cabinet behind him and slid the folder into a slot that should not have fit it. When he turned back, he held a clipboard she hadn't noticed him pick up. On it was a simple form, lined in black ink, the kind used for manual inspection reports 3 systems ago. "Step on the mark, please," he said, nodding, toward a small square painted on the floor. She hesitated, then moved to stand where he indicated. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint vibration rippled through the concrete under her boots, a subtle hum rising from the foundations. She felt, bizarrely, like she was rolling over a scale herself. The man glanced at the analog dial mounted on the wall to his left. The needle quivered, then settled. "Truck's at 79.5, he said. "Good balance. Axles are honest. No excess on the books." He looked at her again. "Altogether, though, you're running heavy." He made a small mark on the form. "Fatigue," he said, as if reading off a measured value. "Not critical yet, but enough that the road might decide to collect, if it gets the chance." He slid the form across the counter toward her. Denise stared at it. Her name was written neatly at the top. Her license number. Her truck number. The carrier's name, though, strangely, the font and styling of it looked like an older version of the logo, one the company hadn't used in years. Under violation, a handwritten note read, "Hars above capacity. Warning." The date line made her stomach dip. It was filled in. But the year was wrong. The day and month matched the current night. But the year was listed as 1999. She exhaled slowly, a thin, disbelieving sound. "This some kind of joke?" she asked, though nothing about the man's expression suggested humor. He followed her gaze to the date. "Paperwork doesn't keep up well here," he said. "Clock doesn't either." He nodded toward the analog wall clock. Its second hand was stuttering, jumping forward, and then back. "We don't worry much about that part anymore." Her throat worked. "What is this place?" she asked, voice low. His eyes softened. Just a fraction. It's a scale house, he said. That's all. Trucks roll in. We see what they're really carrying. Sometimes it's too much. Sometimes it's not the freight that's over limit. He tapped the paper. Take this seriously, Denise. She hadn't told him her name. Up ahead, he continued, the interstate drops toward the river. 2 miles past the second bridge, there's a shallow right curve a lot of drivers underestimate. You know the one. She did. She could picture it, a gentle bend that felt safer than it was, the kind that lured tired drivers into relaxing their focus. If you keep the pace you've been holding, he said, you'll hit that curve at around 2 Your eyes will be heavy. Your thoughts will be scattered. You won't think you're that tired, right up until your front wheel nudges the fog line. He looked at her steadily. That curve has taken a few of yours over the years, he said quietly. Drivers who thought an extra 10 minutes, an extra 20, wouldn't matter. She forced a shaky little laugh. You writing tickets for the future now? She asked, trying to sound braver than she felt. Warnings, he said. I don't do tickets anymore. He slid the form back toward her. At mile 209, he said, you'll see an old truck turnout on the right, just a gravel patch and a broken light pole. No facilities, no cameras. If you're smart, you'll stop there tonight. Put this on your dash. Take a real rest. Let the road find someone else to test. And if I don't? She asked, almost against her will. He studied her for a long moment. Then you and I will meet again, he said softly. But you won't be the one carrying the papers next time. The fluorescent light above them hummed. Denise folded the form with stiff fingers and slipped it into her jacket. Am I clear to go? She asked. He nodded once. Truck's fine, he said. Light's good. Tires good. Load secure. It's only the driver I worry about. She turned and walked back to the door, feeling his gaze on her shoulders. Outside, the air felt even colder than before. The rain had eased to a mist that clung to her skin. Her truck loomed in the wash of light from the awning, idling steadily. As she climbed into the cab and shut the door, she glanced back toward the building. The windows looked darker than they had a moment ago. The open sign over the lane flickered once, then went dark. For a second, she thought she saw, behind the glass, the man still standing there, his hand resting on the counter as if weighed down by habit. Then the reflection of her own headlights swallowed the image. She put the truck in gear and rolled forward, following the arrow back to the merge lane. When she checked her mirror, the way station sat behind her, unremarkable. A squat shadow on the side of the hill. The overhead highway sign beyond it read, Way station closed. Heskin Prekel. She glanced at the dash clock. Iden Sanchesamfen. If the man was right, she had just under 40 minutes until the curve. The practical part of her mind pushed back. Maybe she had imagined the oddest parts. Maybe the form was a weird old template the state hadn't updated, and the date line meant nothing. Maybe the man was just one of those inspectors who liked to talk safety with dramatic flair. But another part, older and quieter, remembered all the stories traded over lady-night coffee at truck stops. Stories about certain stretches of road that seemed to borrow their own rules. Stories about way stations that drivers swore they'd been pulled into, only to find, weeks later, that those buildings had been shut for years. She pulled the folded inspection form from her pocket and opened it again. Her name stared back at her, written in a careful hand. Below the violation line, in smaller print, someone had added a note. Repeat offense. Fatal. Do thousand do not reweigh. Herr Hart lurches. The words made no sense. Not if they referred to her. She'd been alive and driving in 2001. Yes, but very much not dead. Unless the paper wasn't talking about her exactly. Unless it was talking about something that could be. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. At mile 209, an old gravel turnout did appear on the right, just as he'd said. She'd noticed it before on other runs without really registering it. A patch of rough ground where utility crews once parked. A rusted light pole leaning slightly over it. No sign, no services. Just a place. She flicked on her right blinker. Then off. Dispatch's estimated time of arrival glowed on her GPS. If she stopped now, really stopped, shut the engine down, curtains closed, alarms set, she'd probably miss the first dock time and be stuck waiting for them to work her in later. That meant detention for the company, frustrated calls, the whole mess. Her jaw clenched. The curve was just another curve, she told herself. She was a professional. She'd taken it dozens of times, in worse weather, with worse sleep. Rain misted across the glass. The turnout loomed closer. She heard faintly the echo of the inspector's voice. The road might decide to collect if it gets the chance. End of 2000. Her thumb hit the turn signal. This time she didn't second to guess it. She eased onto the gravel, the truck rocking gently as it left the smooth asphalt. She rolled as far forward as she safely could, nose pointed slightly uphill, then set her brakes. The engine's rumble filled the small space, steady and strong. She pulled the inspection form from her pocket again and laid it flat on the dash, where anyone looking in would see it. It felt like a small act of faith, or defiance, or both. Half an hour, she murmured to herself. Just take 30, then go. She shut off the engine. Silence fell, heavy and immediate. The tick of cooling metal, the whisper of mist against the cab, the distant rush of traffic on the interstate, the sounds layered together in a way that made her aware of her own heartbeat. Her eyelids felt heavier than she'd admitted. She didn't even bother climbing into the bunk. She reclined the driver's seat a little, set an alarm on her phone for 30 minutes, and closed her eyes. She was asleep in less than a minute. She woke to the sound of sirens. They weren't close, not yet. A faint rising wail that slid through her dream and hauled her up into waking. Her phone alarm was going off at the same time, a cheerful chime underscored by the distant urgency outside. She slapped it off and sat up quickly, disoriented for a second. The cab was dim, the world outside kind of gray and shapeless. She checked the clock. Ardanling Lufen. Her heart thumped. She rolled down the window a crack. The sirens grew a little louder, then louder still, rising and falling as emergency vehicles raced along the interstate ahead. The CB crackled to life. Got a bad one at the river curve, a shaken voice said. Four-wheeler lost it, bounced off the guardrail, took a pickup with it. Right lane's blocked, debris everywhere. Y'all slow it down when you come through. Another voice cut in, tight with adrenaline. Saw that happen in my mirror, the driver said. Car was weaving for miles. That bend caught him. You ask me? Driver was half asleep at the wheel. Denise sat very still. The curve. Her hands trembled as she started the engine. The turnout lights what few there were threw weak glows over the gravel. She pulled back onto the interstate carefully, joining the flow of slowing trucks and cars. When she reached the river stretch, red and blue lights painted the fog-slicked dark. Patrol cars, an ambulance, a fire truck. Flares spat orange along the shoulder. She kept her eyes on the lane lines, on the officer waving vehicles past, on the reflective chevrons of safety vests. She did not let herself stare at the twisted metal shapes against the guardrail. What mattered was that the scene was already under control. Medics moved with purpose. Firefighters directed traffic. There was chaos, yes, but the organized kind that comes after impact, after the worst has already happened. Her gaze flicked to the right, past the curve, up the hill, barely visible through the mist. The outline of the way station stood against the trees. Dark. No lights in the windows. No glowing open sign. No vehicles in the lot. A battered, sun-o-faded closed sign hung crookedly across the entrance lane, its chain rusted. A chill crept up her spine. Later, hours later, when the sun had risen pale and weak behind the clouds and she was parked at the receiver waiting on a door, Denise scrolled through news on her phone. An article had already gone up about the crash at the river bend. It mentioned weather, fatigue, the dangers of night driving. It included a small note about that stretch of highway's history. The DOT had once kept a way station at the top of the grade, but it had been permanently closed after a tractor-trailer lost control in 2001 and plowed into the scale house, killing the inspector on duty. A grainy photograph accompanied the story. It showed the station in better days, lights bright, a man in uniform standing in front of the bay with a clipboard in hand. His hair was a little darker, his face a little less lined, but Denise knew him. She felt like the room had tilted, just a little. That night, she sat in her cab with her logbook open, staring at the neat lines. For the first time in a long while, she didn't see them as puzzles to be arranged around dispatch demands. She saw them as a reflection of the weight she chose to carry. After that run, she stopped shaving minutes. Breaks were the full length or longer. If her body said no, she listened. When dispatch pushed, she pushed back with quiet, unshakable resolve. Sometimes, months later, she would pass that same stretch again in the dark. The way station remained closed every time. a dark rectangle on the hill. But once, as she crested the grade, tired but not exhausted, she thought she saw a faint green flicker where the open sign had been. It pulsed once, like a heartbeat, then was gone. Drivers talk about that station, now and then. Some insist it hasn't been operational in years. Some swear they've been pulled in on foggy nights when everything on paper was fine, but something in their bones was not. Those who take the warning seem to keep rolling. Those who don't become stories told in rest areas and cafes. Gentle reminders that the road doesn't care what the dispatch screen says. It cares only about what you truly bring to it. On certain nights, when the clouds hang low and the grades rise like dark waves, there are places where more than just axles and freight get weighed. And in one old cinder block building on a hill, a man with a clipboard and a faded patch may still be standing at a counter that no longer exists, quietly checking that a few drivers live long enough to learn which numbers in their logbook matter most. Story number 5. This one follows a driver named Brandon, a man who had grown up with the sound of the highway humming in the background of his life. His father had been a trucker before him, long before Brandon ever set foot in a cab. Most of Brandon's childhood memories of the man came in little flashes. The smell of diesel on a faded denim jacket, the way his boots sounded on the porch, the rough but kind voice that came through the phone from some distant state. And then all of a sudden, the calls stopped. When Brandon was 8, his father's rig went off a mountain road in bad weather. The details blurred in the way adults blur things to protect children. Words like black ice and brakes and steep grade floated around him. But he mostly remembered the quiet in the house afterward. The absence of those boots on the porch, the way his mother folded his father's jacket and hung it at the back of the closet. He grew up anyway. People do. He worked odd jobs, drifted through a few plans, and then, almost in spite of himself, he circled back to the road. The first time he sat behind the wheel of a training truck and watched the horizon roll toward him, he understood why his father had loved it. His mother hated the idea. She tried to talk him out of it, then gave up when she saw the set to his jaw. Instead, she handed him a small cardboard box the week before he left for his first solo run. "I couldn't bring myself to throw it out," she said. "Maybe it'll bring you luck, or at least a reminder not to be stupid." Inside the box lay his father's old CB radio. It was an older unit, boxy and heavy, with chrome knobs and a microphone that had been wrapped in electrical tape at the base to keep the cord from fraying. A faded strip of label maker tape clung crookedly to the casing. On it, someone had typed in block letters, "Gray Ghost," his father's handle. Brandon ran his thumb over the letters, throat tight. "You don't have to use it," his mother said quickly. "I know they've got newer equipment now." But he talked to a lot of good people on that thing. Brought him home more than once when the weather turned bad. He set the box in his sleeper when he left with his first company-issued rig, telling himself he'd figure out later what to do with it. The truck already had a modern CB wired into the dash, all programmable channels and digital displays. The old unit felt more like a relic than a tool. Years went by. He became one of those steady, middle-of-the-pack drivers who make the industry actually function. Not showy, not chasing bonuses, but reliable. He pulled flatbeds and vans, lumber and appliances, whatever the dispatch screen handed him. He used his CB like most younger drivers did, sparingly. Road reports, scale house chatter, the occasional thanks when someone flashed him over. The easy, constant conversations older drivers seemed to hold on the air weren't as common anymore. The old CB stayed in its box. Then, one slow week between loads, he found himself doing some cleaning in the truck. He cleared out trash, wiped down the dash, shook dirt from the floor mats. When he was done, his eye fell on the box tucked under his bunk. He pulled it out and opened it. The radio stared up at him, its chrome dulled but intact. He lifted it, surprised at the weight. On impulse, he unbolted the generic CB from its mount in the dash and, with the help of a YouTube tutorial and a bit of trial and error, wired the old unit in its place. The power light flickered orange when he flipped the switch. The speaker hissed softly, a blanket of static that somehow sounded warmer than digital silence. He turned the squelch knob until the hiss dropped to a low murmur. "Breaker 1 to 9, radio check," he said into the mic, feeling faintly foolish. A familiar chorus answered different voices, same tone. "Gotcha, driver." loud and clear. "You're getting out," and so on. He smiled. A small private thing. For a couple of weeks, nothing unusual happened. The old radio did its job, passing on weather reports and boredom-killing chatter, the same as any other. Brandon got used to the feel of the heavier mic in his hand, the little click of the worn push-to-talk button under his thumb. It happened on a run across Kansas, in the thin hours of the morning when the world shrinks down to the stripe of pavement in front of you and the riderless fences on either side. The sky was a low ceiling of cloud. The fields were empty and dark. His headlights caught the white posts at the edge of the right-of-way and the occasional reflective eyes of some small animal freezing at the roadside, then darting away. The CB had been quiet for a while. Most drivers were either asleep or too tired to talk. Brandon was sipping bad coffee and thinking about nothing in particular when the speaker crackled. "Breaker 1 to 9, you out there, kid?" The voice was male, middle-aged, calm. It sounded like any number of voices he'd heard on the radio over the years. But the way it said "kid" made something deep in him tense. He reached for the mic. "Yeah," he said, "go ahead." Silence stretched for a second. Then, "Figured you'd be up," the voice said. "You always did like the night miles." Brandon frowned. "Who's this?" he asked. "Might want to ease over a lane in about half a mile," the man said, ignoring the question. Right lane's got a surprise waiting. Brandon instinctively checked ahead. The highway looked clear. No sign of construction, no flashing arrows, no brake lights. Still, the warning made his shoulder blades itch. He flicked on his left signal, checked the mirror, and moved into the passing lane. 15 seconds later, his headlights swept over the right lane. The pavement there had collapsed into a shallow trench about 3 feet wide, where a culvert had given way under the recent rains. No cones surrounded it. No warning signs. In the dark, with a bit of road spray and a wandering mind, he could easily have missed seeing it in time. His trailer hummed safely past in the left lane. He swallowed. "Copy the hazard," he said into the mic, his voice a little tighter than he intended. "Appreciate the heads up. You got a handle, driver?" The speaker hissed. "Don't you recognize me?" the man asked. The grain of the voice shifted then, subtly. Not enough to make it someone else entirely, but enough to nudge a memory. A particular rhythm to the words. The way certain vowels stretched, certain consonants softened. It sounded, Brandon realized abruptly, like his own voice would sound if he were 20 years older and had smoked for 30 years. His hand tightened on the mic. "Pretty sure I'd remember," he said carefully. A chuckle, low and familiar. "Maybe not yet," the man said. "But I've got you, kid. Eyes up. Next 10 miles are clean." Before Brandon could respond, the transmission cut. The speaker went back to its low, background hiss. He sat there, heart beating fast, his gaze sweeping the road. It could have been a coincidence. Someone ahead of him had seen the hazard, called it out, and happened to use a tone that collided with an old memory in his head. That was the rational answer. It didn't explain the kid. Nobody on the road called you kid, unless they knew you personally or were trying to get under your skin. And this hadn't sounded like mockery. It had sounded fond. His father had called him that. "Wake up, kid. Sun's up. Come on, kid. Help me with these bags. Be good for your mom, kid." The rest of the night passed without another strange call. The radio carried the occasional weather update, a joking argument about the best truck stop biscuits between two drivers somewhere to his south, the mundane soundtrack of the highway. By the time he parked in a truck stop outside Denver late the next morning, Brandon had nearly convinced himself he'd imagined the familiarity in the voice. Nearly. He didn't tell anyone. The second time it happened was a few weeks later, up in Montana, on a 2-lane state highway that served as a shortcut between interstates. The scenery was beautiful in daylight, rolling hills, distant mountains, but now, under a starless sky, it was just a tunnel of his own lights and the occasional glow of a farmhouse far off the road. Snow remnants lined the ditches. The pavement itself was merely damp. The worst of the ice melted, but the temperature hovered just above freezing. He was scanning for the subtle, glassy sheen that meant trouble when the CB hissed. "Gray ghost to little ghost," the voice said. "You reading me?" Brandon's heart gave a weird jolt. Little ghost. That was what his father had called him sometimes, in the days before cell phones and email, when he'd be packing for a run. "Me on the big radio," he'd say, tapping his CB. "You on the little one, little ghost." They'd had a plastic toy set then. Brandon had played with the handheld receiver, babbling nonsense into it, while his father pretended to answer from the cab. No one on this highway knew that. His hand shook as he picked up the mic. This is Grey Ghost, he said, stumbling briefly over the name he hadn't used. His own handle on the road was ordinary, something he didn't feel pressing to share now. Who am I talking to? You're right, starting to glaze up, the man said, his voice low and steady. Side of the hill throws the cold down onto that lane. Stay in the tracks or you're going to feel funny in the steering in about 30 seconds. Brandon glanced at the pavement. To his eyes, it looked the same in both lanes. Dark, dull, unremarkable. But he eased a little to the left, keeping his tires in the faint grooves worn by whoever had passed before him. 20 seconds later, his truck shivered as the rightmost bit of tread brushed a patch that gleamed just a little too brightly in his headlights. He felt the faintest twitch in his steering, the suggestion of a slide that didn't quite happen. He sucked in a breath. Appreciate it, he said. No rush tonight, the man replied. Load will still be there in the morning. Take your time getting through this stretch. Brandon forced a laugh. You dispatch now? A pause. The hiss of the highway, barely audible through the speaker. Dispatch didn't fold your dad's jacket and put it in the back of a closet, the man said quietly. Dispatch didn't see your face when you decided you liked the road anyway. Brandon's stomach dropped. Who is this? He whispered. Just keep it under 55 until the junction, the voice said. I'll be around. The line went dead. Silence flooded the cab. He drove the rest of that section tense and hyper-alert. But the pavement behaved. No more surprise ice. No animals darting into the road. No other traffic. The night lay cold and unremarkable around him. At the next safe pullout, he eased to the shoulder and set his brakes. His hands were damp on the wheel. He pulled out his phone and, after a moment's indecision, called his mother. She answered groggily. Brandon? You all right? Yeah, he said automatically. Sorry. Forgot what time it is there. She yawned. What's wrong? She asked. Because mothers always know when nothing isn't quite true. Did Dad ever record anything? Brandon asked. Like on tape? His voice? She was quiet a moment. I have a couple of old voicemails saved, she said, from back when we still had an answering machine with those little tapes. And there's that one message he left from Omaha the night before. She trailed off. Why? He stared at the CB. I just thought I heard someone who sounded like him, he said. On the radio. Silence stretched again, heavier this time. He liked that handle too much to retire it, she said finally. He'd be tickled to know you're using his rig. Maybe that's all it is. Echoes. Maybe, Brandon said. He didn't tell her about the warnings, about the kid, about Little Ghost. He finished the run without incident. The third time the voice came through, there was no room left for coincidence. He was hauling a light load of furniture through western Colorado in late autumn, threading his way between storms. Dispatch, eager to shave miles, had routed him along a 2-lane mountain road that his GPS described as scenic and efficient. Older drivers had another word for it, unforgiving. He'd taken this route once before. In good weather, its switchbacks and narrow shoulders demanded respect. Tonight, with wet leaves plastered to the pavement and low clouds cutting visibility, it felt like an unnecessary risk. He argued with dispatch, pointed out longer but safer ways around. They countered with fuel costs, tight windows. How many drivers cut through here all the time, with no problem? He compromised with himself. Go slow. Be careful. Trust skill. He was halfway up the grade when the old CB popped sharply, as if someone had tapped the mic on the other end. Brandon, the voice said, clear as if the man were sitting in the passenger seat. You don't want this road. He didn't question how the caller knew his name this time. There's no weather advisory, he said, more to the windshield than to the radio. Road's open. Chains not required. I'll be fine. Maybe, the man said. Maybe not. You know what happened to me up here. Brandon's grip on the wheel tightened. He knew in the general sense. Black ice. A curve with no guardrail. A truck that went down and never came back up. He had been 8 when they gently explained it to him, their words as padded as they could make them. You're just a story they tell you, Brandon muttered. Static and memory. Maybe, the voice said again. Or maybe I'm what's left of a guy who didn't make the smart call when he should have. Don't think of me, kid. Think of your mother getting another folded jacket, Think of whoever has to sit in the front row at that service. Brandon swallowed hard. Wind pushed against the side of the trailer, nudging the whole rig toward the drop-off. His headlights washed over a sign. Next 8 miles, steep grades, sharp curves, no shoulder. Dispatch will lose their minds if I turn around, he said. Dispatch can hire another driver, the man replied. Your mother cannot hire another son. A bitter laugh escaped before he could stop it. You think she'd forgive me if I bailed? You think she'd forgive you if you didn't? The man countered. Brandon's jaw clenched. He could see the road curling ahead in his mind, the way it clung to the side of the mountain, the spots where rockfalls had scarred the shoulder. He remembered the white wooden crosses dotted here and there on the outer edge. He looked at the dash clock. If he rerouted now, dropped back down to the interstate loop, he'd add nearly 2 hours to his run. The receiver would probably grumble. Dispatch would definitely complain. His own pride, the part that bristled at the idea of being scared off a road, would take a hit. But he'd live. That curve with the big boulder at the apex, the man said quietly. Third one after the second runaway truck ramp? Brandon could picture it. Everyone who ran this road knew it. That's where I didn't wake up fast enough, the voice said. That's where your life split in two. One version where your dad comes home late but whole, one where he doesn't. You're on the seam of those choices right now. Static fizzed faintly. You don't owe any freight more than you owe the ones who wait on you, the man finished. Turn it around, little ghost. The nickname, spoken in that voice, knocked out the last of Brandon's resistance. He flipped on his turn signal. The first wide spot he found, a gravel patch used by road crews. He eased off the pavement onto it, heart pounding. Getting turned around on a narrow mountain 2-lane with a trailer wasn't fun, but he'd done harder maneuvers in tighter docks. The CB stayed quiet as he worked. The wind gusted, the engine growled in reverse. The trailer tires bit into the gravel. Finally, he got himself pointed downhill. He took it slow. Back on the main highway an hour later, with the safer route stretching ahead and the mountain road now a winding line on his GPS he would not take, his phone buzzed in its cradle. Dispatch, of course. He answered on his hands free. Why'd you leave the route? The planner demanded. You just added miles we can't bill for. Road looked worse than expected, Brandon said. Weather's turning. I'm not risking the load or the equipment. There was exasperated sighing, talk of schedules and customers and everyone else making it through just fine. Then send someone else that way, Brandon said evenly. I'm not doing it. If that costs me the lane, so be it. Something in his tone must have carried, because after a few more grumbles, Dispatch relented. They pushed his delivery window back, promised to talk later, and hung up. He drove the rest of the night in a strange, taut calm. At a fuel stop the next day, he heard it. 2 drivers at the counter were talking in low voices, trading news the way drivers always do. Did you hear about that wreck on 74? One said. Up past mile 68, on the tight curve? Brandon's back went cold. No, the other replied. What happened? Guy with a light load went over, the first said. Hit some slick spot, I guess. State Patrol says it's the 3rd bad one on that stretch this month. They're pushing for more warnings. Brandon kept his face neutral as he paid for his coffee. Later, outside, leaning on his fender, he scrolled through local news on his phone. There it was, a short article, a photograph, a tractor, trailer at an awful angle on a mountainside, emergency crews clustered around. The company name had been blurred in the picture, as it often was before details were released. He stared at the image. The crashed rig was the same make and model as his. Same color. Same style of aftermarket bumper guard he'd installed a few months back. The only obvious difference was the unit number. He let out a long breath. That night, parked at a quiet rest area, he sat in his darkened cab, the old CB glowing softly in the dash. The road noise around him was muted. Somewhere, another driver's television murmured through a sleeper curtain. Crickets sang beyond the asphalt. He picked up the mic. Breaker 1 to 9, he said, feeling faintly foolish. Gray goes to whoever's listening. The speaker hissed. He almost set the mic down. Then, copy kid, the voice said, soft and wry. You made the smarter mess tonight. Brandon's throat tightened. Was that really you? He asked. Or am I losing it out here? A quiet chuckle. Maybe a little of both, the man said. Does it matter if you're still upright? Brandon let out a breath that hitched halfway. "I wish I'd known you better," he said. The words surprised him. He hadn't meant to say them aloud. "You're doing all right," the voice replied. "Better than I did, in some ways. You listened. That's more than I managed. That last night." Static crackled. "Keep the squelch open on nights like that," the man added. "If I've got anything useful to say, I will. Otherwise, you know the drill. Slow down. Take the break. No load's worth the empty chair at someone's table." The emotion in Brandon's chest was a strange mix of comfort and ache. 10-4, he said quietly. "Appreciate you, Gray Ghost." "Always, little ghost," the man replied. The line went still. After that night, Brandon didn't hear the voice often. Weeks might pass with nothing but ordinary chatter on the CB. Drivers griping about traffic, laughing about small things, talking weather and road closures. But now and then, in the lean hours before dawn, when the road ahead seemed thinner and the world felt tilted just a bit, the old radio would crackle. A simple warning about a deer in the median. A quiet heads up about a fog bank hiding a sudden merge. Once, just a gentle, "Time to shut it down, kid," when Brandon found himself blinking too slowly at the wheel, insisting to himself he could make it another hour. He never argued with that voice again. Other drivers would talk about strange things they heard out on the air, phantom calls from dead channels, pranksters mimicking other people, echoes from distant frequencies. Brandon kept his story mostly to himself. When he did tell it, sitting at some chrome-edged counter with his hands curled around a mug of coffee, he stripped it of its sharpest edges. He let it be a strange coincidence, a sentimental notion that maybe, just maybe, voices don't always vanish when the engines stop. He never mentioned the way the old CB's power light seemed, on certain nights, to dim and brighten in rhythm with a heartbeat that wasn't his, or the way, once, passing a roadside memorial cross on a mountain curve, the radio whispered a single word with quiet, fierce satisfaction. Good. The road is full of stories about voices on the air that shouldn't be there. Some scare, some taunt, some, like the one that rode with Brandon, simply steer. Out on the highway, where miles stretch and hours blur, a driver's world can shrink to the glow of the dash and the sound of a voice in the dark. And sometimes, if a bit of old wiring and willpower and something else line up just right, that voice might belong to someone who has seen how a story ends and is determined to help write another version. In 1,000 cabs, on 1,000 roads, the CB hiss never quite goes silent. Now and then, if you listen closely in the quietest hours, you might hear someone say, softly, on a channel that should be empty, "Eyes up, kid, you're not alone out here." And that brings us to the end of tonight's journey through the dark. If you made it this far, thank you for riding the night road with me. These stories remind us that even in the quiet hours, something out there is always watching, always waiting, just beyond the headlights. If you enjoyed these haunting tales, tap that like button and help us reach our goal. And if you're still awake, drop your city and the time you're listening down in the comments. I always love seeing who's sharing the road this late. For now, rest easy, keep your doors locked, and until the next haul, stay safe out there.